Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. 2 Lebanese soldiers are killed, 3 others injured in an Israeli strike on an army outpost in the south of the country. This follows repeated Israeli strikes on UNIFIL outposts in which 2 UN peacekeepers have been injured. The fallout from Hurricane Milton continues to grow as the death toll rises to 16. More than 2.2 million people are left without power as officials continue to count the cost of the deadly hurricane. And with 24 days to go until Election Day, the former US President Barack Obama attacks Donald Trump and throws his support behind the Democrats' candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, Donald Trump will likely hit back when he holds a rally in Colorado later on today. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We begin with Lebanon, where the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that 2 Lebanese soldiers have been killed, 3 others injured in an Israeli strike on an army outpost in the south of the country. Well, earlier in the day, 2 UN peacekeepers were injured when the Israeli military struck a watchtower that belonged to a Sri Lankan battalion, which was part of the UN interim force in Lebanon. Well, the Israeli military says they're investigating the incident, but they say that they did warn UNIFIL of fighting nearby. Well, in response, the Lebanese government has instructed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to call on the UN Security Council to vote on a resolution for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. Well, this comes after 22 people were killed, 117 others injured during Israeli strikes in central Beirut last night. Well, the strikes hit a densely populated residential area in the heart of the Lebanese capital, which had previously been untouched by such attacks. Well, reports suggest that Wafiq Safa, the head of Hezbollah's liaison and coordination unit, was the intended target, although it is believed that he survived. Well, let's get the latest from Beirut now, and we can speak to the Middle East correspondent at The Economist, Gareth Brown, who joins us now. Gareth, thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Last night's deadly air raid on central Beirut, presumably it was terrifying. It's understood that all the victims were civilians. Just bring us up to speed on the latest on the ground today.
Well, it's a hugely significant development for 2 reasons. One, I think it fits with this wider pattern of the war spreading. The war is spreading outside of the south of Lebanon and out of those southern suburbs where we know Hezbollah has quite a lot of strength. So this was in an area, very close to downtown Beirut, not far from the French embassy, where, traditionally we wouldn't associate it with Hezbollah. So it's important in that regard. But I also think we have to look at the target, as you mentioned, Wafiq Safa. Now, what's interesting here, Wafiq Safa is not what you would call part of Hezbollah's military command and control. He's more related to, his Hezbollah's internal security apparatus within the country. And I think when we look at it in that regard, everything so far, these airstrikes which have been pummeling Hezbollah's leadership and took out not least Hassan Nasrallah himself, have been aimed at the military command and control. Now, perhaps this is the beginning of a change in Israeli strategy, which is not just focused on the battlefield and the war going on in the south, but is actually focused on degrading Hezbollah's, internal control capabilities, not just among their own population, but across Lebanon.
Yeah, and he was also, wasn't he, Hassan Nasrallah's brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Lebanon's military says that an Israeli strike killed 2 Lebanese soldiers and wounded 3 others. We've also recovered reports of UN peacekeepers coming under fire. It really looks like this conflict is spiraling out of control at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's very, very difficult for Israel to they've repeatedly said that this is a war against Hezbollah. It's not a war against the Lebanese state or the Lebanese people. But the reality is that it's very difficult for Israel to distinguish. We've seen a number of incidents, not just in the last 48 hours. This is the second time that Lebanese army soldiers have been killed. Now, Israel claims they're caught in the crossfire. Claims that the UN peacekeepers who were injured today were, given basically directions to get out of the way because they were fighting. They were fighting Hezbollah nearby. But that's not really how it works. The UNIFIL has a mandate from the UN Security Council. It's UNIFIL's commanders are in control of the forces' movements and distribution. But it seems there's probably going to be more incidents like this, especially as Israeli forces push deeper and deeper into Israel. And it's concerning not just for Lebanon, but I think for the international community. The Lebanese army is funded by the United States of America. It's a key part of American plans for stability in Lebanon, but across the region as well.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how likely it is that important pieces of Lebanese infrastructure are going to be hit, because I know in previous conflicts, like the 2006 conflict, main bridges, main highways were struck. It's all eyes on the airport as well at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And I think when you ask people about their memories of 2006, usually the first thing they say is they talk about the airport, and they talk about that being closed. And, Lebanon has this huge land border with Syria, which is just practically not usable for many, many people living here. And I think the airport is a key conduit, not just for people getting out or fleeing, but also for humanitarian aid. We saw the Prime Minister's just announced that Saudi Arabia is going to, start an air bridge, and basically be flying in humanitarian support. That's going to start imminently. The airport is Lebanon's lifeline to the rest of the world. And that's the key piece of infrastructure. But I think, we have to look at Gaza and potentially any kind of piece of infrastructure. It could be desalination plants, it could be power plants, it could be bridges. Everything could potentially be a target. And I think that will be a sign that the war is deepening, is widening, is creeping closer to Beirut. We haven't seen it yet. And, as I speak, flights are still coming in and out of Beirut airport, but it's on the front of everyone's mind.
Yeah, those flights coming in empty and, of course, leaving full with people trying to escape the country. And just lastly, I just wonder what morale is like in Lebanon right now. I just wonder what the mood is like. I mean, I'm assuming at times like this, people are glued to their televisions. What are people saying to you?
Yeah, I think everyone's watching the news. Everyone's getting their information, perhaps in the same way that we're getting ours. I think in the last week or two, I think the war has started to feel a lot closer. There was a certain distance, over the last however many months of, airstrikes happening in the south or in the Bekaa Valley. But frankly, that feels quite distant from Beirut. But now we're seeing more airstrikes in Beirut, and not just in the suburbs, in the city center. It feels like every day, every few hours, this war creeps closer and closer. And this complacency which had existed until about a month ago, there was this genuine belief, I think, with lots of the Lebanese that this wasn't going to escalate and it was going to be controlled. That's completely gone. And I think everyone in Beirut and beyond is now expecting this to get much worse before it gets better.
Okay, Gareth Brown, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest from Beirut. For more, we can speak now to the former Special Envoy for Middle East Humanitarian Issues and a former US Ambassador to Lebanon between the years 1998 and 2001. Ambassador David Satterfield, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. I just want to ask you, first of all, how you feel when you see the country that for the best part of 3 years you called home under bombardment once again.
Well, my reactions to the present situation are multiple. First, any destruction of elimination of Hezbollah's terrorist leadership is to be welcomed. They have blood, all of them, on their hands, U.S. and many other countries as well, in addition to Israeli. The issue is support for the progressive diminution of Hezbollah's leadership is quite different from a campaign that even potentially has a goal in Lebanon beyond the very specific one of implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. That has to remain the goal. And U.S. diplomacy has been focused on exactly this point. It means you don't strike infrastructure. You don't strike innocent civilians. You don't attack, whether it is by accident or intent, UNIFIL personnel, or the Lebanese armed forces who are caught in this situation. The focus has to be as precise as possible on a mix of kinetic pressure on Hezbollah plus diplomatic efforts to achieve a resolution along with the Lebanese government that produces compliance by Hezbollah at long last, 18 years on, with Resolution 1701. Now, you will have seen the comments made this morning by Prime Minister Mikati that there was an acceptance of 1701. We need to hear that from Hezbollah, and it has to be demonstrated on the ground. And the commentary cannot be through third parties or vague. It has to be an acceptance that 1701 will be implemented. If that is indeed the case, then international U.S. diplomacy is ready and prepared to put this into place, and this fighting and its consequences can stop.
It's been just over 20 years since you last lived in Lebanon. I just want to ask you, I mean, first of all, I imagine there's a great sense of déjà vu about what's happening, but is there a sense in your mind that this was somehow inevitable? Did this look like this was an inevitability, do you think?
No, it doesn't. Not to me. Indeed, if you had asked me at any point since October 8, when Hezbollah chose to initiate without provocation attacks on Israel, which have continued ever since on a daily basis, is a conflict inevitable? I would have said the risk is always there, not by intent, but by misadventure, by mistake, by miscalculation. It can come, but not by intent. And that is still my view. This is a very dangerous situation. It's a very risky situation involving Iran and Hezbollah's internal calculations. But it isn't a certainty that a genuine explosion will occur. This can still be stopped. And the best way to stop it would not just be to have a, quote, ceasefire, close quote, but to have implementation of 1701. That gives a more enduring sense of security to Lebanese in the south, as well as to Israelis in the north. And it could open the door to a political step, which has eluded Lebanon for the past 2 years, which is the election of a president. Hezbollah's grip on the political system in Lebanon has prevented, along with other factors, such an election. Perhaps now is the moment, certainly it's something the French, the U.S. governments are talking about, to try to advance that concept. But the first thing that must be done is to put an end to this fighting through implementation of 1701.
But would that necessarily bring an end to the fighting, given that, you know, we're seeing time and time again Israel appearing to disregard what its allies, in particular those in the Biden administration, are asking it to do?
I think we should have every reason to believe that if there were to be genuine acceptance by Hezbollah in a formal sense of Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires a withdrawal of Hezbollah's armed elements north of the Litani River, that if that were in fact to happen, our expectation internationally would absolutely be this fighting would stop.
We were just hearing from a correspondent on the ground there in Beirut. 22 people were killed overnight in those Israeli strikes, all of them civilians, we understand. Do you think Lebanon's heading the same way as Gaza?
The commentary from the highest levels of the U.S. government and others on exactly that point has been pretty stark, pretty crisp. No, we reject absolutely any equivalency between the thoroughly disastrous situation today in Gaza and any such outcome in Lebanon. That is not something which should happen. It is not something which needs to happen. It would not be an outcome which I think anyone in the international community, including the United States, would or could support.
Ambassador, we heard today from the head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, referring to the situation in northern Gaza. He says there's no end to the hell there. Hell's the right word, isn't it?
I think it's a very appropriate word. And I would extend it to the situation of the 1.7, 1.8 million Gazans, and now confined to perhaps 15% of the total territory of Gaza in the so-called Mawasi area. It is thoroughly miserable. It is not static. It is deteriorating, and winter is coming. And with that, the critical need for shelter, that's a need that has never been met, as well as for appropriate medical, sanitary, and other humanitarian services. Again, they're not present. The situation cannot be sustained as it is. It will grow increasingly worse.
Ambassador David Satterfield, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Arabiya News.
Thank you.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has travelled to Germany as part of a multi-country tour across Europe. Well, Zelenskyy is expected to meet the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and press him for access to long-range missiles. That's something that Scholz has refused to do so far. Well, from Berlin, here's our very own Trent Murray.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy is a president under pressure as his forces face a renewed surge of Russian manpower along the front. He's come to Europe to request more military aid to keep his troops in the fight.
We want to defend Ukrainian independence, Ukrainian families, our people, the right of our children to live free in their own country.
His two-day tour has included visits to Rome, London, Berlin and Paris.
I want to restate here France's support to the Ukrainian resistance in the face of the Russian war of aggression.
For Kyiv, worries remain over Washington's commitment to the war, with former President Trump using his campaign to rally against the billions spent by the US on aid to Ukraine.
In so many deaths, so much destruction, it's a horrible thing. And one of the things that are very bothersome to me is the fact that Europe is paying only a small fraction of the money that the United States of America is paying.
That rhetoric has rattled European capitals amid concerns that if Washington withdraws from its vast funding program for Ukraine, Europe will be forced to pick up the slack. Germany is the second biggest financial contributor to Ukraine's military aid after the US. But even so, Washington is providing 5 times the amount as Berlin. There is a quiet understanding here that if the US withdraws from this conflict, Germany and Europe, for that matter, will seriously struggle to fill the gap. And while Ukraine's allies have handed over tanks, ammunition, air defence and even fighter jets, hesitation still exists over some weapons. Zelenskyy has long called for Germany to supply long-range missiles to strike deep in Russian territory, something Chancellor Scholz continues to refuse.
Lieber Volodymyr, Deutschland steht weiterhin fest.
Dear Vladimir, Germany continues to stand firmly on the side of Ukraine. For almost 1,000 days, Putin's Russia has been waging its merciless war of aggression against your country. The heroism and bravery of Ukraine cannot be honoured enough.
With Ukrainians bracing for another tough winter ahead amid attacks on its power plants, it will be hoping the colder months don't also bring with them a freezing of the front lines and a settlement that forces them to cede territory to the Russians, a prospect they say is likely unless Western allies stay the course and keep up their military aid. Trent Murray for Al Arabiya News, Berlin.
In other news, at least 20 people have been killed in a coal mine in Pakistan after gunmen stormed the workers' living quarters and opened fire. Heavy weapons, including rocket launchers and grenades, were reportedly used in that attack. Well, reports say that at least 6 people are being treated in hospital for their injuries. One person's been killed, 12 others have been rescued from the bottom of a gold mine in Colorado. This after being stuck at about 300 meters below ground for around 6 hours. Well, the mine, which is a tourist attraction, turned deadly after the lift malfunctioned. The authorities are probing that incident. 4 workers at the Taiwanese tech giant Foxconn have been detained in China. The arrests made under charges of breach of trust, with Taiwan calling the move, quote, strange. Well, Foxconn, which is the world's largest iPhone manufacturer, is yet to comment on the incident. And survivors of the US atomic bomb dropped on Japan have been awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Nihon Hidakanyo is an organization representing the survivors of the nuclear blasts in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. All the members of this group have campaigned tirelessly for a world free of nuclear weapons. To the United States now, where a massive cleanup operation continues in Florida, following on from the deadly Hurricane Milton, which roared through the state. At least 16 people were killed after this, the 5th most intense Atlantic hurricane on record, devastated parts of Florida. Well, the full extent of the damage still isn't clear, but it's estimated that insurers could face a bill of up to $100 billion. Well, let's get more on the ground with Mark Robinson, who is presenter on the Weather Network and also former co-host of The Storm Chasers, a TV show there in the US. Thank you so much for being with us once again, Mark. Tell us where you are, what's going on around you, and I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that, you know, there was serious damage, there were losses of life, but this was not the worst case scenario that many people had feared.
Yeah, absolutely was not the worst case scenario. The storm, the center of the storm went just south of Tampa Bay. And that meant that the storm surge hit places like Sarasota, Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte, south of the main urban area. If it had gone into Tampa Bay, we're looking at 15 feet of water being funneled up into the city itself. And that would have turned this from a huge disaster to a gargantuan disaster. But as it happens now, I'm actually traveling from Tampa towards Orlando, and you can sort of see a lot of things going on behind me. And that would be all the people moving from Orlando back towards Tampa. I mean, the roads are just jammed. Everybody is hunting for gas at this point. You can see behind me, the gas pumps still wrapped here. There's just a few spots that do have both power and gas. But the cleanup definitely beginning, but this is going to take a very long time to get life back to normal in this part of Florida.
And just talk us through the scale of the damage. And do you think it's fair to say the worst of the damage actually came from the wind rather than from water?
You know, that's a good question. At this point, you know, a lot of the damage that I've seen has been from the wind damage and flooding damage. The storm surge, we're still sort of assessing some of the damage that's been done along the coast. It often takes a couple of days to really get a good handle on the amount and locations of where that damage is. So that's going to begin now. You're going to start to see more and more information coming out about the different areas of damage. But we can sort of say, that southern areas, the Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte area, that took the waves, that took the surge. Tampa, that one took the wind damage and the rain and the flooding. So lots of flooding issues in that area. But no matter where you are along that west coast, you're dealing with difficulties, especially now with everybody moving around. We were at our hotel last night. They didn't have food. They basically ran out of food because they hadn't got any shipments in 5 days. So that's the kind of issues that they're going to be dealing with for quite a while. And it'll probably take a few weeks to get things back to normal. And right now, my fingers are crossed that hurricane season is finished for Florida.
Yeah, it's going to take quite a few weeks. It's also going to take quite a few billion US dollars. I mean, some very big numbers being discussed about what the cost of getting life back to normal there is going to be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, whenever you get a sort of a disaster on this scale, the amount of resources that have to be poured into getting things back to some semblance of normal is always absolutely staggering. If you think about something like Hurricane Katrina, that was $200 billion, in 2005 to get that city back up and running. And it is still not back to normal. So that's the kind of thing that you're dealing with when you have a disaster on the scale of a hurricane, cyclone, typhoon. It hits such a large area.
Just one slightly unusual question I wanted to put to you. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation doing the rounds about this severe weather system. There are quite a few conspiracy theories doing the rounds as well. What are the sort of things you're hearing? Perhaps some of the stranger things you've heard during the last couple of days?
I mean, I laugh. It's a serious situation, but I do laugh because, yeah, these conspiracy theories come out every single time. There's been lasers that move it. One political party has controlled the storm to go into another political party's territory. These are the kind of things that come up all the time. And I think it's just because people like to think somebody's in charge, that somebody is doing something, and it's not just, random nature. And this is just how, our planet works. And I think that scares people. But this is actually just how our planet works.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for sharing all of that with us. We really appreciate it. Mark Robinson, Weather Network presenter. Thank you so much indeed.
My pleasure.
We're going to stay with the United States now, and the former US President Donald Trump is expected to take aim at immigration as he continues to stoke fears in a bid to woo voters. Well, the Republican nominee is in the deep Democratic Party territory of Colorado, a state he has depicted as being a war zone overrun by Venezuelan gang members. Well, our correspondent Benji Haya has more for us.
Security camera footage of gun-toting men in a Colorado apartment building. This went viral in August. Right-wing influencers and Donald Trump latched onto the incident. The Denver suburb where it occurred has become a symbol for the former president, who claims migrant crime is a result of the high rates of illegal immigration under Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, Trump is taking his rhetoric to this very city, holding an immigration-focused rally on Friday and bringing a community of migrants under intense scrutiny.
It's so frustrating to see that they're afraid for their safety. You have people who are now, because the locations are so publicized, you have folks in cars that have driven past with guns threatening to kill all of the Venezuelans.
Donald Trump is pledging the largest deportation in US history if he wins in November. Polls show nearly 2/3 of Americans believe illegal immigration is a crisis, and a majority want levels reduced. It's forced Democrats to shift their tone on what is a major concern for voters. But Trump's language on the issue has been littered with lies and racist tropes. He stated in last month's presidential debate that immigrants from Haiti were eating people's pets. And he stands accused by the White House of spreading misinformation about its response to recent hurricanes, having suggested emergency funds were being diverted to illegal migrants.
The federal government, on the other hand, has not done what you're supposed to be doing. In particular, with respect to North Carolina, they've let those people suffer unjustly.
Trump was in Michigan last night. His rival, Kamala Harris, partook in a town hall discussion in Las Vegas on Spanish-speaking television, before holding a rally in Arizona, another swing state.
Our administration has mobilized thousands of federal personnel across the region to work hand in hand with local and state officials to give folks the help they need. I have spoken with state, local officials, both Republican and Democrat, to let them know we will be with you every step of the way as you recover and rebuild.
Whilst in Pennsylvania, the key election battleground, a ringing endorsement from a familiar face.
The idea of intentionally trying to deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And my question is, when did that become okay?
Barack Obama declared this election to be as much about character and values as policy. He's not the only former president backing Harris on the campaign trail. Bill Clinton will make stops in Georgia and North Carolina in coming days in a push to mobilize voters in the places which will ultimately decide the fate of America's political future. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Of more, we can speak now to Spencer Critchley, an award-winning communications specialist who worked on both of Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. He's also the author of Patriots of Two Nations, Why Donald Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. Spencer, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on Arabiya News. The former President Barack Obama has been out on the campaign trail. Just tell us a little bit more about what he's been saying and doing in order to try to win some votes for Kamala Harris.
Well, I think the most important thing that he's doing is being Barack Obama. I watched his speech last night, and there is nobody like him. It's a talent that cannot be taught. He's the kind of person who was just blessed with a natural charisma, natural ability to connect authentically with an audience, and that was on full display last evening. And it really is, I would say, more important than any of the actual content, which is something that many other Democratic candidates struggle to learn from. With Obama, the content is there. The substance is definitely there. He's a very intelligent person who is very deep on policy details, but he knows that politics is, about 99% emotional connection. And that's what we were seeing yesterday on behalf of Kamala Harris. And I think one of the great advantages of the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz campaign is that both of them are also showing themselves to be very strong in that emotional connection dimension as well.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I was just thinking as I was looking at that report filed by our correspondent there, you've got Barack Obama flying the flag for Kamala Harris. You've also got this other army of former US presidents that support her. There's Joe Biden, let's not forget, who's still in the White House. There's Barack Obama, who we've just talked about. Bill Clinton. Jimmy Carter's still alive, although I don't expect he's particularly active on the campaign trail at the moment. And potentially as well, George W. Bush, who certainly isn't supporting Donald Trump. I mean, these are really serious endorsements, aren't they?
Oh, yes. And, it's quite remarkable that there are no previous Republican presidents. Now, of course, many of them have passed on, but not even vice presidents who are supporting the Republican nominee. You saw none of those leading party figures at the Republican National Convention, which is extremely unusual. And instead, you see hundreds of Republicans, including more than 700 senior national security officials of both parties, speaking out against Donald Trump, and not just opposing him politically, but warning the country of the grave danger he represents to democracy and to national security. It's widely understood that George W. Bush really does not support Donald Trump, but he has not spoken out yet. I actually think he should. I think he has a duty to. But his vice president, Dick Cheney, who, of course, is about as Republican as Republicans get, has warned specifically that he sees Donald Trump as the most serious threat to the republic in the United States in the entire history of the United States.
We're going to be hearing from Donald Trump later today when he's in Colorado, I believe, and I think he's going to be talking a lot about immigration. I mean, that is a key concern for voters there in the run-up to the US presidential election. How much are Donald Trump's messages resonating there with US voters, would you say?
Well, it's clearly resonating with many millions of voters. Unfortunately, of course, Donald Trump is a classic demagogue who has earned comparisons in this dimension, at least to Adolf Hitler. Now, of course, we have to be very careful to compare anybody to Adolf Hitler because of the enormous scale of death and suffering that he was responsible for. But in terms of demonizing, people who are not so-called real Americans, it's exactly the same playbook as many others have also noted. And it's evil, essentially. It is appealing to the darkest parts of human nature. And unfortunately, it's all too easy to summon those parts. It's one of the easiest tricks in the book to make one group of people hate another group of people. I mean, psychologists have proved over and over again, you can randomly collect people off the street, give them different colored T-shirts and assign them to different teams based on that. And within minutes, they'll start judging the other team as less intelligent, less trustworthy, etc. There is a legitimate immigration issue in the United States, which reasonable people of good faith can discuss, and which people of both parties have actually been trying to solve, most recently with a bipartisan bill that Donald Trump torpedoed because he wants the issue. He doesn't want the solution. And meanwhile, he's saying just the most hateful and increasingly ugly and hateful things about immigrants. And this in a country that would not exist without immigrants and that is built on immigration. It's one of the greatest things about the United States when it's living up to what's best about the United States is that, haltingly and uncertainly, for sure, over the centuries, it has welcomed immigrants and immigrants have built this country. There actually is no American culture without immigrants. There's no such thing as American culture without immigrants. It's made up of the contributions of many cultures.
Yeah, I mean, despite everything you said about Donald Trump, the race is extremely tight. And, the polls, I don't know, you tell me what the polls are saying at this particular stage.
I think the polls are reflecting a deep division in the United States. And, I wrote about this in my book, and I'm continuing to think and write about it now, that ultimately this really, I think, is a psychic division. It's almost two different forms of consciousness. As the consensus worldview that used to more or less unite the United States has broken down, and we see this worldview breaking down across the developed world, people are left to construct their own worldviews or adopt worldviews offered to them. And one way of looking at this is that there are just two tribes now who look at the world completely differently, and they define even truth, what's true and what's morally good along different dimensions. It's very hard to do the liberal exercise of finding common ground in a world like that when you can't come to a common ground over what's true or what's right if you don't define truth and right the same way. There is no common ground. And so I think that's what the polls really are showing us. They're not going to budge very much one way or the other, I don't think, unless we can always see a big surprise on Election Day. But I think really this division is much more a psychic, tribal, cultural division than it is anything having to do with the different policies of the two different parties.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but it's been great speaking to you. Spencer Critchley, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Just before we leave you, some business news stories we've picked out for you. The World Trade Organization says it's forecasting a 2.7% increase for global trade in the year 2024. That prediction is slightly higher than the WTO's forecast earlier in the year. Well, the report forecasts a decline in exports in Europe, but manufacturing powerhouses like China, Singapore, South Korea will more than make up for that. The French government has been defending plans for next year's belt-tightening budget. The finance minister Antoine Armand says that the plan for billions of dollars of spending cuts and tax hikes is necessary in order to rein in France's debt burden. And driverless Teslas in 3 years from now? Well, that's Elon Musk's hope as he debuts the EV maker's latest self-driving vehicle, the Cybercab. Well, departing from conventional designs, the Tesla car will charge wirelessly. It has no pedals. The launch event was catered for by humanoid robots, and it gave attendees the chance to test out that new car, which is expected to have a price tag of around $30,000 US. Let's get a reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya News. 2 Lebanese soldiers are killed, 3 others injured in an Israeli strike on an army outpost in the south of the country. This follows repeated Israeli strikes on UNIFIL outposts in which 2 UN peacekeepers have been injured. The fallout from Hurricane Milton continues to grow as the death toll rises to 16. More than 2.2 million people are left without power as officials count the cost of that deadly hurricane. And with 24 days to go until the US election, the former President Barack Obama has been attacking Donald Trump and throwing his support behind the Democrat candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, Donald Trump will likely hit back when he holds a rally in Colorado later on today. Well, that is all we have time for. Coming up next is Riz Khan's interview with the Israeli president and the Hamas head of political relations. And at 1:30 p.m, do join my colleague Rosanna Lockwood for today's edition of Global News Today.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. As the world marks the first anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas in Israel, I'm presenting a special episode of the show featuring a world-exclusive interview with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog and leading Hamas spokesperson Dr. Bassem Naim. I sat down with both men as they reflected on a turbulent year and considered the challenges ahead as the Middle East stands on the brink of a full-scale regional war. I'll begin with Isaac Herzog, the President of Israel, who spoke with me from Jerusalem. President Herzog, thank you very much, sir, for making the time for this interview. Now, the latest chapter of violence in the Middle East began with the Hamas attack on Israel 1 year ago. How do you expect it to end across the region?
I think we should find a way, following the terrible year that we've all gone through, as we mark the 7th of October of last year, which was a day of tragedy and pain of unequivocal magnitude for us and for the region. I think that we should now, when things are shaking in the Middle East, should find a common exit strategy that enables a better future for the people of the region. Clearly, as we see, this war has been waged on us by the Empire of Evil, by Iran and its proxies. We have 101 hostages still in the dungeons of Gaza in immense suffering. And we are fighting in the north and in the south, meaning in Gaza and in Lebanon. We are trying to change the equation and bring a hope for the people of the Middle East. And now is a golden opportunity for the powers that want to have a better future for the Middle East to move forward with new ideas and new plans in order to resolve this conflict and exit from the war. But I'm not sure, as I read our enemies, that they are there still.
Mr. President, based on what you're saying, for Israelis, do you think the first anniversary of October the 7th should be marked as a day of reflection and remembrance, or one of revenge and retaliation?
We are not dealing with revenge and retaliation. We are first dealing with a lot of pain and agony. I can tell you, as the head of state of Israel, I've seen enormous pain and agony that I've never imagined I would see in my life. I see enormous pain and agony of hostage families, of wounded people, of bereaving families, immense amount of bereaving families, of communities that have been displaced and so forth and so on all around the country. And the real issue is that we understand that there was a huge, huge opportunity that was laid out originally by President Biden, actually, just before the war, of the connectivity of Israel all the way to India, through the Middle East, through Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and so forth, that would bring hope and a huge message of peace in the region. And this hope was derailed by this vicious, horrific attack of the Iranian proxies by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis from Yemen, and proxies in Iraq and so forth. Now it's a big challenge, but if we change the equation and uproot this empire of evil and move forward to a better future of connectivity and peace in the region, this could be of historic magnitude.
You know, sir, after an attack that was clearly quite brutal, a year that began with Israel receiving almost universal sympathy and support from the international community seems to be ending with it being seen by many now as a global pariah. Now, isn't that a damning verdict on Israel's response to that attack?
We know that we are being attacked as part of the entire war machine against us, attacked in the international legal forums, attacked in public opinion, attacked on campuses and so forth. But we truly believe in our vision. We are a democracy. We are an oasis in the Middle East. We have Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze and Circassians living and dwelling together. Unfortunately, yesterday, Hezbollah has attacked in missiles a bunch of Muslim towns and cities, our brothers and sisters, we are with them in this war. This is the real reality of the region. The real reality that we're offering the region is a reality of coexistence and living together, making, of course, peace agreements and surfing towards accommodating each other. We are all the children of Abraham, and I call upon the people of Lebanon, the people of Iran, the people of all of the oppressed nations in the region to rise up and understand that if we move this empire of evil, truly an empire of evil, if we confront it and be tough together, we surely can hope for a better future and create a NATO-like structure in the region that blocks radicalism and terror.
Well, sir, last week's missile attack by Iran on Israel caused relatively little damage. Is the retaliation worth provoking a wider war, global recession, further strikes on Israel?
So first of all, I can tell you as somebody who was in the shelter that it is extremely unpleasant, naturally. 181 missiles, big missiles on Israel. It's one can think it's one of the largest attacks in one shot on any country, and clearly deserves an answer. But we are considering our reply, and we are considering the next step of how to prevent and how to deter the Iranian war machine. And since I'm not part of this, it's not under my responsibility, I leave it up to the government and the military, and I think we are calculating all calculations in this respect. But one has to understand Iran is the only country in the world who calls for the eradication of another member state of the United Nations. That's Israel. And they keep on saying it all the time. I saw the speech of the supreme leader. There was no message of accommodation or extending a hand or saying, let's move together, and two great nations, historic nations, to move together and help change the life of people in the Middle East. Rather, you see Iran spending billions of dollars of their own citizens' money on a huge war machine, on other people's infrastructure, which are all aimed to create pain, havoc, rape, burn, take hostages, and chop and destroy. So either we offer hope, or we go for destruction. Iran offers destruction, we are offering hope.
Well, Mr. President, as obviously a person in your position, could you confirm whether or not there would be a retaliation against Iran, and how soon?
I cannot go into any detail, of course. I think the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu were pretty clear. But having said that, we are, of course, looking on the grand picture and understanding all of the various calculations and interests, and yet it is clear to us that being attacked in such an aggressive manner and brutal manner needs retaliation and an answer that will deter our enemies.
Considering how you describe it, Mr. President, would Israel, or would you advocate Israel going as far as eliminating Iran's oil facilities, its nuclear sites, even its leaders?
I have no intention of responding to your question.
Okay, so
don't take it personally.
No, I understand. But has the U.S. given you any go-ahead for any attack on Iran, from what you know?
So we have an intense dialogue with the United States, our closest ally and friend. We have an open, frank, and friendly discussion with them on analyzing both the strategic issues as well as the various operational considerations on the ground. Today, the commander of CENTCOM, General Kurilla, is going to visit Israel, and I'm sure it's going to be the main topic of the day.
Mr. President, you've claimed that Israel's attack in Beirut, which killed the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and many of its senior commanders, ended a meeting that was planning an October the 7th style invasion from Lebanon. When will you present any proof of such a claim?
Well, you know, we have been gathering a lot of information and intelligence on Hezbollah and its operations, including Hassan Nasrallah. We know exactly what they were planning to do, And I must say that, we don't expose our sources, but nobody can deny that, because they've had the Radwan forces on our border, and they've launched endless attacks on Israel cross-border since October 8th with no real reason. They violated the international border. They violated Security Council resolutions and numerous UN resolutions. They actually brought Lebanon into a huge risk. They were part of a major axis of evil that tried to surround us from all over, and it was clear that with this exchange of fire going on, that they were planning something strategic.
Although the Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib claimed that the former Hezbollah Secretary General had agreed to a temporary 21-day ceasefire before he was eliminated. From what you know, is that true?
I have no idea of that information, and we don't have any proof to that effect. To the contrary, as far as we know, there was no willingness on their part, just like there's no willingness on the part of Sinwar in Gaza to move on a hostage deal. There's a lot of fake news going on in the region and the world, and let's put the record straight. On October 7th, a terror attack was launched from Gaza. Thousands of terrorists broke into Israel, burning, chopping, raping, kidnapping innocent civilians. By the way, many of them the biggest supporters of peace in the region. And thereafter, an enormous onslaught from all over, including from Yemen, by the way, which is another example of what a proxy is all about. It's a small tribe armed up to its neck by Iranian money and Iranian resources, and then threatening the entire high seas transportation in the world, raising the cost of living of every person around the globe. So if you look at it objectively, what Iran is doing is not only radicalizing the entire region, it's threatening the entire world, and it's trying to undermine the sovereignty of many nations in the region as well and in the world. Now, terror and other proxies.
Now, President Herzog, of course, what Hamas and its allies did on October the 7th have been described as war crimes. Can you rule out that any war crimes have been committed by Israel since October the 7th? Can you definitively rule that out?
Yes, I definitely rule that out. I know and exactly how we operate. We have legal counsel to every unit, even small units. We follow the exact rules of international humanitarian law. And I want to say something. I care for our neighbors. I deeply care. We care. We care for the pain of our neighbors, but we have the right to defend ourselves. And when we are defending ourselves, we are defending ourselves from missiles in people's homes, in people's shops, in people's mosques, in people's playgrounds or schools. It's unbelievably annoying when you see this in Gaza or in southern Lebanon or throughout Lebanon. It's unacceptable. This is what the world needs to do. People who believe in peace and freedom in the region and the world needs to stand up and say, this is unacceptable. Don't put any missile in your living room or in your sleeping room or anywhere else. Just get it out of there. And if you and put sovereignty of nations like the government of Lebanon to run the border with Israel and not through Hezbollah.
I would ask you, President Herzog, how you would account for the way Israeli soldiers have behaved with their posting of all the things they've been doing, because that doesn't show much caring.
So I will say, look, we mobilized about 500,000 people. People left their jobs and schools and any other things, universities, put on uniform and went to fight. They are human beings, they have families, sometimes they can say something which is unacceptable or painful. We are a democracy, so people feel free to say something. This does not in any way reflect the code of conduct of our military and our security operations or the instructions of our commanders or the rule of law that is the basis for the operation of every soldier in our military.
If they have breached international laws...
By the way, people were investigated. People were investigated and are adjudicated and were arrested. And that can, unfortunately, things can happen. But this is not in any way reflective of what the Israeli Defense Forces are.
You answered my question there. So now, after 12 months of fighting, are Israeli citizens safer now than a year ago, or has Israel essentially just created a new generation of enemies?
I wish that this new generation will see a better future. Now we have to focus on the day after. The real effort has to be on the day after. How do we change the fate and future of Gaza? The Gazan people, the people in Gaza Strip deserve a better future as neighbors of ours, and we deserve a better future as their neighbors. It's possible, it's feasible, it requires leadership and bold steps forward. I trust, of course, that leaders in the region who've expressed their interest to be involved in the day after will be part of a major change, historical change, that will enable a real future of peace between us and our Palestinian neighbors.
Well, Mr. President, one thing that is marking this anniversary is what seems to be cracks in the alliance that Israel has in the West. And I wonder what you make of President Emmanuel Macron in France calling for an arms embargo against your country.
So I was disappointed by this comment by President Macron, who I have long-standing good relations with. I would expect leaders of the free world to understand that in a way, in many ways, we are fighting for the future of the free world. We are fighting against extreme forces that really, in my mind, do not represent what the real values of Islam are. We are fighting against an enemy that wants to reign over all the Middle East and move forward, and has aspirations, historical aspirations, also towards Europe and the United States. And we are here to block that, together with allies who understand that the future of the region is peace, coexistence, using the enormous resources of this region for the better of the world and doing good. It's feasible. Let me tell you something. I was a minister in the cabinet of Ariel Sharon in 2005, where we were, he came forward with the whole idea of getting out, that Israel will move out of the Gaza Strip. It was a very bold step. We uprooted settlements and settlers who were there 3 generations. We went to them and we told them we will rebuild a Hong Kong of the Middle East. That was the name of the whole idea, a Hong Kong of the Middle East. But unfortunately, as we moved out, Hamas came in with Iranian support, killed their cousins, brothers, and family members from Fatah, took over Gaza and turned it into an army base and a launching pad for terror against Israel and the region. This is the whole reality of the Middle East, meaning we have to be strong and tough together against this enemy and change the equation and direction of this region into a hopeful region.
Well, President Herzog, always so many questions, never enough time. I thank you so much for making the time for this interview. Thank you, sir. That was my conversation with the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog. I'll turn now to the perspective from Hamas and my conversation with its head of political and international relations, Dr. Bassem Naim, who joined me from Doha. Dr. Bassem, thank you very much for joining our show. Now, 1 year after the so-called Al-Aqsa flood operation on October the 7th, what did you set out to achieve, and how far have those actual objectives been realized?
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you and to your audience. I think Palestinians were suffering of a racist colonial occupation for 75 years, and Gazans in particular, added to this occupation, they were suffering of a 17 years suffocating siege. At the same time, for the last 2-3 years, there were declared plans from the Israeli government adopted, and finances and budgets were allocated to implement these plans, including the total control of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Judaization of Jerusalem, the annexation of the West Bank, and keeping Gaza separated. And then the final plan is to integrate Israel in the region without solving the Palestinian question. All these motivations were behind the step which we consider as an act of defense. Therefore, taking in consideration all these motivations, we think that we believe that we were able, if not to stop all these deteriorations in the Palestinian question, but at least to make it difficult or to prevent it to be implemented as the Israelis see.
Okay.
Here I have to say that we are aware that it is not an easy task and the prices could be very high, but we have no choice other than to stand up, to defend our cause, to defend our people, to defend our holy places. Otherwise, the plan was to wipe out totally the Palestinian question from the regional table and from the international arena.
Okay, so let me then ask you, what did you expect would be the reaction of the world to what was a very brutal attack on October the 7th?
Unfortunately, we are really disappointed from the response of the international community, especially the Western powers, to observe a daily genocide committed live on air with clear declaration from the Israeli side and clear intentions to commit a genocide and to keep silent and to allow the Israelis to blatantly violate the international law. I think this was disappointing. We were expecting that the international community will move to stop this genocide, to stop this aggression, and to move towards implementation of all international resolutions regarding the Palestinian question and giving the Palestinians their genuine rights of an independent state, an independent self-sovereign state, the right of return, and self-sovereignty.
Dr. Naim, according to reports, Hamas trained extensively for quite a while before the actual attack was launched, even a couple of years, with a number of other Palestinian armed factions. And I think 5 groups joined Hamas on October the 7th to launch the attack into Israel. How much influence did Hamas have on those other groups once that attack was launched? How much could they, control the behavior of the other groups?
Hamas is a Palestinian liberation movement, and yes, we have prepared ourselves for years for this act of defense because, again, we are people under occupation for 75 years. Palestinians have offered a hand for a political solution for decades, since 1993, after signing the Oslo Agreement. All these attempts to solve this conflict politically were undermined by the Israelis, and it was declared goal by Benjamin Netanyahu to sabotage this so-called political solution of the Palestinian question. Therefore, yes, we believe that it was no other choice than to stand up and to fight back and to resist the occupation. Based on this, we have called all other factions, including Fatah, to join us to join us for any action to defend our cause, to defend our people, to defend our holy places. Out of this wide arena of Palestinian factions, there are some Palestinian factions who joined this goal and who was part of these activities. And we believe that it is not about the influence of Hamas. It is more about that these factions strongly believe that this is the only way to bring the Palestinian cause back on the table, to knock the doors of this biggest open-air prison, especially in Gaza, and to get the attention or to draw the attention of the international community towards our just cause.
Now, Dr. Naim, when you say that, the Israelis are not looking for peace and that, you're looking to make peace yourselves, the argument that Israel keeps throwing back is that Hamas has stated very clearly that its goal is the elimination of Israel. So Israel can always throw that back at you and say, well, we can't have peace with a group that looks for our destruction.
First of all, Hamas has in 2017 stated or declared its position in its political document that we are ready if all Palestinians accept a state on 67 borders, an independent self-sovereign state on 67 borders with Jerusalem as a capital, and preserving the right of return, we are ready to cooperate, and we are not planning to hinder or to prevent such a political solution, and we will join this solution. This is on one side, but on one side, Hamas is talking loudly that we are for a political solution if it is feasible. On the other hand, you have to remember that 1996, in the first meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu as a prime minister and Yasser Arafat at that time, he declared his position that he is going to undermine the so-called two-state solution or political solution and sabotage any political vision. But what is more important, it is not about Hamas. It is more about the other side. I think we have witnessed a few months ago that Netanyahu in front of the UN General Assembly, this was in September before October 7th, and recently also in September 2024, he declared his position that between the river and the sea there will be no political entity except Israel, and he is planning not only to contain or to confine the conflict to the Palestinian issue, but he is planning to change the whole map of the Middle East. Therefore, again, it is not about the Palestinian position. PLO, which is representing the whole Palestinians, has taken a clear stance toward the conflict, but this was undermined. Yasser Arafat was assassinated. After that, the West Bank, 80%, I mean Area A, Area B and Area C was annexed. Palestinians in East Jerusalem are expelled forcefully, as we witness every day. The holy places, I mean Al-Aqsa Mosque in particular, they are planning and they are declaring these goals. They are planning to control the mosque, to take it over, to destroy it. I can give you only one number, that between in 2023, 55,000 extremist Jews stormed the mosque, performed all prayers, and planned to enter the mosque and to change the status quo against international law and against the treaties between Israel and Jordan. Therefore, again, it is not about a political party on the Palestinian side. It is about the position of the other side, which is clear.
Understood. But Dr. Naim, what I'm saying is that if the argument that Israel always throws out is that Hamas cannot be a partner in peace because it's got a stated goal of destroying Israel, surely if Hamas officially says we do not have that goal of the elimination of Israel, that would change the dynamic and the relationship in terms of trying to achieve a peace.
Again, what should Hamas do more than to declare its official goal in its political document 2017 by talking about the acceptance of Hamas of a common ground between all Palestinians, which means if we have the chance to have a Palestinian state, an independent self-sovereign state on 67 border with Jerusalem as a capital, preserving the right of return, that we will cooperate in this, we will be part of this. But again, on Gaza, you have Hamas, you have October 7th, you have the resistance. In the West Bank, you have the PLO leadership, you have the PA, the Palestinian National Authority. What is the situation on the other side? Annexation of the West Bank, Judaization of Jerusalem, more than 20,000 Palestinians killed between 2000 and 2023 on checkpoints in their own land, in their houses, burned by extremists. What is, again, on the other side, we have a Palestinian partner who is ready to go ahead for this solution. But what is the response from the Israeli side? Declaring
Yeah, no, sorry, Dr. Naim. I realize.
2017 or 18, he has declared. Yes.
No, sir, I know you've gone over those issues. I was really just looking to see if Hamas would officially make its position, one which says we no longer look for the destruction of Israel, and then perhaps Israel has less of an argument against it. But let me ask you this. Did you believe that taking hostages would at least provide you more protection or, preserve the protection of the fighters against Israel's response? And perhaps that hasn't happened. The other thing is, obviously, there are families now arguing with the Israeli government for the return of their hostages. I spoke to one of them. They're desperate for news about the hostages. What information can you tell me about the condition of the remaining hostages after 1 year in captivity?
First of all, I want to reject this kind of arguments because it is part of the Israeli propaganda that we have captured Israelis in order to protect ourselves or our fighters. No, we have negotiated with the Israelis for years and years to get our freedom fighters, our heroes behind bars in Israeli jails, to get them free. Nael Barghouti is now for more than 44 years in jail. And like Nael, there are a lot of Palestinian leaders and fighters behind Israeli jails, but we have failed. And the international community have also failed to help Palestinians to get their prisoners free. Therefore, the main goal of capturing Israelis, I'm talking about soldiers, is how to get our prisoners free. We have offered from day one, after October 7th, to have a serious prisoner exchange to release all prisoners, all captured Israelis, and to get all our prisoners free. But Israel, from day one, has rejected all these proposals and have declared 3 goals: to crush Hamas, to evacuate Gaza Strip from its people, and to retrieve the captured Israelis forcefully. Therefore, we have also accepted at least 2-3 times different proposals from the mediators, and each time these proposals, which was accepted publicly and praised by the mediators and by the Americans, was sabotaged by Netanyahu and his racist government, either by committing new massacres or assassination of the top negotiator, or by adding a new condition like what he has did in the last negotiated deal in July 2nd. We are ready to go for implementing this negotiated deal, which, by the way, this negotiated deal of July 2nd, the core of this negotiated deal is an Israeli paper, which was adopted by Joe Biden, and we have welcomed this Joe Biden proposal. Then it has become the UN Security Council resolution, and we have also welcomed this. Therefore, we are ready to go immediately for solving the whole issue by going for implementation of this broker deal.
Okay. Dr. Naim, can I ask you just for an update on the condition of the current remaining hostages? What sort of state are they in? What sort of health, what sort of conditions are they being held in?
I have no details, but what I am sure of, that these captured Israelis are suffering like our people from the continuous Israeli bombardment. Few months ago, the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigade have clearly stated that at least 80 of these captured Israelis were killed by Israeli bombardment, and this was also emphasized or confirmed by all those Israeli prisoners released along the last few months, that most of the time they were scared not by the guards from Al-Qassam, but mainly by the Israeli bombardment, or to be shot directly by Israeli soldiers, like what happened in Shijaiya neighborhood or in Nusayrat by the attempt to rescue some of the captured Israelis. They have rescued 4, but at the same time they have killed 3 others and killed more than 250 Palestinians. Therefore, I cannot give you now, because of the very complicated situation on the ground. They are in different areas by different groups. Exact numbers and exact or details about their situation now on the ground.
12 months on, it's obviously not only the Israelis who suffered. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, more than 100,000 injured in the Israeli response, which the attack from Hamas provoked. And much of Gaza is now reduced to rubble, more than 70% of the buildings reduced to rubble. So while you've refocused the world's attention on the plight of the Palestinians, haven't you also now contributed more to their suffering through that action?
First of all, it was not provoked by Hamas. We were provoked for 7 years by a racist Israeli occupation. We were for 17 years by suffering of a suffocating siege. By the way, Palestinians along the 75 years or along the 57 years after 1967 occupation, they were not enjoying peace and prosperity and security. We were killed on a daily basis. We were our economy was totally undermined. We were suffering, especially I am a Gazan. I left Gaza a few days before October 7th, and I was the Minister of Health. We were denied food and medicine and electricity, freedom of travel, including patients who were seeking to leave Gaza Strip for treatment abroad. Therefore, we haven't provoked anyone. We stand up to fight back, to open the doors of this biggest open-air browser, as even some Israelis have described. Second, do you believe that we should be accused for all what has happened along this year because someone on the other side have decided to go against international law and international humanitarian law and to smash not only the Palestinian but also international humanitarian law and under the Israeli bulldozers? I don't think that ICJ, the International Justice Court, have described what's happening there as a genocide to accuse Palestinians of this. If you decide to commit a genocide, I think this is not the fault or the mistake of the victim, that he was accidentally or he was there and he was attacked by the enemy. Again, we stand up to defend ourselves, to defend our family, to defend the future of our children, to defend our holy places and the future of our just cause. Yes, we know that we have paid a lot of price, but this is because of the failure of the international community to secure a just cause for the Palestinian question. This is the crime of the Israeli side, who have publicly declared their goals to, once one of them have called to throw an atomic bomb against the Palestinians. I don't think that this is the fault of Palestinians when someone decide to do it. Again, what we still consider it a political conflict. We are looking for a political solution. From day one, we have handed over to the mediators and to the Americans and other countries that we have a roadmap of 3 phases. Phase 1 is to stop this aggression, to reach a deal of prisoner exchange, and to rebuild Gaza or to resuscitate the people inside Gaza Strip, to go for a Palestinian unity, to form a Palestinian national unity government representing all Palestinians, and thirdly, to go for a political solution based on the international law and international resolution toward the Palestinian cause. I think from day one we were ready to go for a political solution, but again, because of the complicit of the international community, mainly in the West, in particular the Americans, who have supplied the Israelis along these months by hundreds of thousands of tons of explosive materials and weapons, by billions of dollars, by giving them or securing them a political umbrella, using the veto at least 4 times in the Security Council. And in parallel to this, they talk about an attempt to reach a ceasefire, but all the time they were sure that Netanyahu is not planning at any time to reach a ceasefire.
Well, the complication, Dr. Naim, of course, is that, as you stated, one of the intentions that Israel has made very clear is it wants to wipe out Hamas completely. How close are they, having taken key people out, people like Ismail Haniyeh, who's moderating for peace, how close is Hamas to being totally wiped out as a fighting force?
First of all, today, unfortunately, the international media, mainly mainstream media, they portray this conflict as if it is between Hamas and Israel. It is not between Hamas and Israel. It is between Palestinians who are fighting now for more than 100 years for their dignity and freedom, and the colonial occupation. Now they have the problem with Hamas. 20 years ago it was with Fatah. 40, 50 years ago it was with the PFLP. Therefore, it is not about Hamas. They can crush Hamas. They can smash Hamas if they are able to do it. But again, they will face the same problem in 10, 15 years, because they will create a new generation of Palestinians who are more committed to fight and to struggle for their freedom and dignity and to secure a better future for our children. How much they are near to reach this goal, I think he has used all what he can, especially at the beginning, to crush Hamas and to crush the resistance and to kick out Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. After 1 year, we can see that Hamas is still fighting. Hamas is still in control and command. Hamas fighters on the ground are in a very good shape. Maybe you have watched, and the audience have watched, a video of a very complicated military operation in the eastern part of Rafah, near the borders, where Hamas fighters were able to attack Israeli bulldozers and Israeli Merkava tanks, and to kill a lot of Israeli and wound a lot of Israeli soldiers. I am talking about an area which is totally controlled on the ground, from the sea and from the air, by the Israelis now for at least 4 or 5 months. Again, Hamas is still in a very good shape, and all other factions who are participating in this resistance are in a very good shape. They are still in control and command, and I'm sure after 1 year, Israel has failed to achieve any of its 3 declared goals.
If Hamas's total elimination is part of the mission of Israel, how much in danger are you? You're a member of Hamas. Is your life threatened?
Look, anyone who is standing up to fight against such a colonial, very aggressive, very brutal enemy, to fight for freedom and dignity of his own people, he has to keep in mind and to put in his calculation that this was one of the scenarios. We are praying for Allah for years to end our life as martyrs and freedom on this path of this noble path. Therefore, yes, this is a chance. But at the end, the decision how my life will be ended and when it will be ended, this is the decision of Allah. It is not by Netanyahu or his government. But if it will happen, again, this is part of our calculations. And I have to tell you and the audience that if you study all the assassinations along the 40 years of Hamas life, each time Hamas, after the assassination of some of its leaders, starting by Sheikh Yassin and Dr. Rantisi, each time Hamas become more and more stronger. Hamas in 1987 started by throwing stones. Today Hamas is able to knock down Merkava 4 and to sniper Israeli, very, very sophisticated Israeli soldiers. Therefore, Hamas always become more stronger after assassinating its leaders.
Dr. Naim, how encouraged are you by what seems to be cracks in the relationship between the Western allies of Israel and Israel's leadership? It seems, for example, President Macron of France calling for embargo of weapons, and other countries also expressing concern that there may be something of a gap now between the Israelis and their allies. How does that encourage you, or how do you regard that?
We observe all these declarations and steps as a positive step in the right direction. But at the end, we believe that all these declarations are tactical declaration. But when it comes to the strategic issue of this conflict, there is no gaps and there is no dispute between the Israelis and their allies in the West. We can take it very serious, or we can take it serious, I mean such steps, if we see the Western allies go to the Security Council to implement the international resolutions regarding the ceasefire agreement, regarding the reunification of the Palestinian territories, to undermine all these settlements activities, and finally to give the Palestinians their own genuine rights of an independent, self-sovereign state, and to guarantee the right of return for all Palestinians who were displaced forcefully in 1948 by the Israelis. Therefore, it is a tactical move, but when it comes to the core issues, when it comes to the strategic questions of this colonial occupation, we don't see a serious gap or a serious dispute between the two parties.
So what impact has Israel's focus on Hezbollah and its actions in Beirut and Lebanon in general? What impact has that had on what's happening with Hamas and its confrontation with Israel?
I think this has impact on two levels. One, they have attacked Hamas now for the last few months. They have attacked Hezbollah for the last few months in order to disengage Hezbollah from supporting Hamas or the resistance in the Gaza Strip, to make it easier for them to isolate the resistance in Gaza and to isolate the Gaza Strip and to give them more chance to crush Hamas or the resistance to reach their declared goals. But they have failed up to the last moment before assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he said clearly in his last speech that we are going to continue our unwavering support for the resistance in Gaza, and a ceasefire agreement has to start first in Gaza Strip.
Okay.
On the other level, I have to say that these are plans hidden now, or declared, not hidden, for years by the Israelis, that they are planning to attack Hezbollah. They are calling Hezbollah to move northern of Litani River and to disarm the Hezbollah inside Lebanon. I think this is Netanyahu, as I said earlier, he declared these goals in front of the UN General Assembly. He is going to change the maps of the Mediterranean, of the Middle East. It is not only about Lebanon. In maybe in few days or weeks, we might see the same thing in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran.
Yeah. Dr. Naim, as we're almost out of time, I do want to just touch as a final thought on what you believe. You've talked about the right of return and the 67 borders and so on, but what are the red lines for Hamas on any post-war settlement with the Israelis? What are the absolute no-nos that you won't allow?
You are talking about the current conflict, or generally about the conflict
right now? What's going on right now? If this conflict was to end, what are the red lines that you are setting to say we will not negotiate unless these particular issues are met for this current conflict?
We are committed to the UN Security Council resolutions, which is clearly talking about permanent ceasefire, total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, no geographical or demographic changes inside the Gaza Strip, and lifting the siege and rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. These main elements are not negotiable.
All right, Dr. Bassem Naim, thank you very much for your time, sir. And that's all from this special edition of the show. I'm Riz Khan, from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hong Kong. Situated in the eastern region of China's Pearl River is Hong Kong. Its name roughly translates to fragrant harbor, as the city's natural geographic features make it an ideal water port. Hong Kong greatly embodies the Chinese concept of yin and yang, a balance of contrasting features. It's a modern city with a beautiful skyline, but at the same time, Hong Kong's roots are deeply rooted in rich Chinese and Buddhist cultures. Go urban and visit the cityscape for the biggest shopping malls and the best in modern architecture that the city has to offer, or take it slow by visiting the many age-old Buddhist and Confucian temples around Hong Kong. Because of its British colonial history, Hong Kong is also a veritable melting pot of East meets West cultures in Asia. You'll see that this is especially evident in the contrasting architectural marvels around the city. Hong Kong is considered as one of the international hubs in the region and is home to the biggest international companies operating in Asia. Hong Kong is also a food lover's paradise. Whether it's big fancy dining like Hong Kong's award-winning Tim Ho Wan, or just your hole-in-the-wall food stop, there's bound to be something for you. Of course, no visit is ever complete without some must-see destinations. If you're going to Hong Kong, don't forget to check out the Tan Tian Buddha, a giant 112-foot bronze statue depicting Buddha, which is located in Hong Kong's Lantau Island. The Star Ferry Harbor Tour, a short 11-minute ferry across the Hong Kong harbor. Tickets are cheap and the ferry schedule is set throughout the day. It's a great way to catch a glimpse of the Hong Kong skyline. For those eager for the Hong Kong nightlife scene, Lan Kwai Fong is a place to be. Boasting of over 90 establishments catering to food and entertainment, Lan Kwai Fong is also known to attract local and foreign celebrities. And of course, let's not forget shopping. Hong Kong's famous Temple Street Night Market is a bargain hunter's dream. Everything from fashion, electronics, toys, and souvenirs are here.
Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Coming up on the show, at least 22 killed and more than 100 injured after an Israeli airstrike hits a densely populated neighborhood in central Beirut. The Lebanese government has asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to push the UN Security Council to vote on a resolution for immediate ceasefire as 2 more UN peacekeepers are injured in southern Lebanon. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expresses hope for a diplomatic resolution in Lebanon as he backs efforts by the fragile state to assert itself against Hezbollah. Welcome. Well, we do start in Lebanon, where the Health Ministry has reported some 22 people were killed and at least 117 injured in the deadliest assault on the city centre since hostilities erupted. Among the deceased, a family of 8, including 3 children who had recently evacuated from the south. The strikes targeted a densely populated residential area in the heart of the Lebanese capital, an area that had previously remained untouched by Israeli attacks. Reports indicate that Wafik Safar, the head of Hezbollah's liaison and coordination unit, was the intended target of the strikes. It's believed he survived. Meanwhile, the Lebanese government has directed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to urge the UN Security Council to vote on a resolution calling for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. The instruction comes as 2 more UN peacekeepers are injured in Israeli fire in southern Lebanon. Earlier today, Lebanon's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Israeli army hit a watchtower of a Sri Lankan battalion, part of the UNIFIL, the UN interim force in Lebanon. Well, for reaction to those airstrikes in the capital last night, I'm joined from Beirut by the Deputy Representative of UNICEF, Etty Higgins. Etty, good of you to make time for us. And you and I last spoke 2 weeks ago at the sort of start of the escalation of everything happening in Beirut about what could come. And really, the worst fears have been realised. Tell us what it was like in Beirut last night.
Indeed, it was. We were here at the UNICEF office in Beirut, and we were still here having with the team, and there was a huge explosion and followed by a lot of smoke. So it really, tragically, it rattled the entire city. People were absolutely terrified, and we had many people who were leaving their homes in the surrounding areas. People's homes were damaged and destroyed, and in fact, 5 staff working for one of UNICEF's partner organizations, their homes were destroyed in the blast. And we know that several children also were killed, and we're still trying to confirm the number of children that were killed, because it happened in a very densely populated area and there was no warning. So really, this is another really terrible event on top of the escalating crisis over the past number of weeks here in Lebanon, and particularly in Beirut. We've tried to be out every single day, trying to support families that have been made homeless. We still have children who are living on the streets, and unfortunately, there has been a number of these airstrikes that have taken place close to shelters and schools where the population that fled the south or fled the southern suburbs have been seeking shelter. And now what we're facing on the ground, as the UNICEF teams continue to deliver assistance like water and clothes and blankets and mattresses every day, what we're seeing is that the weather is actually turning. So in the coming 10 days or so, we expect that the temperatures will drop, especially in parts of the country that traditionally do get very cold at this time of winter, and families are completely unprepared without shelter, clothing or food in what are now becoming really, really terrible conditions. And so children's health is really beginning to suffer. Today, my team have just told me that they've been prioritizing families that have 5 children or more, or that have children under the age of 2. So we have to do triaging, because there's just not enough shelter for all of the families that are homeless right across Lebanon and also here in Beirut itself.
I mean, a terrible state of affairs, and there must be a huge impact not only on the physical harm, of course, caused by strikes and those types of attacks, but the mental harm as well. I mean, how scared are people at the moment in Beirut?
I mean, they're terrified, and as UNICEF, we are trying to deliver services for over 350,000 children who have been impacted by the crisis. And many of them, I spoke to them a few days ago in one of the shelters. They're terrified even of planes passing overhead. They literally put their hands over their heads and run inside when they see any airplane. And we're trying to deliver psychosocial support and just basic recreation materials, because the schools have been closed. Still, we have more than 700 shelters that are actually schools, are not operational. So we have over 1 million children now in Lebanon that are not receiving an education. And an education is critical for their psychosocial well-being, as well as, of course, part of being part of a normal life, being a child. And the children have told us they just want to go back to school. They just want to go back to their villages and their homes and have a normal life. But really, we see no sign of this happening in the near future, given the continuing escalation of the conflict. So in summary, children are terrified, and we're doing our best. But it's very difficult. Last night, one of the staff that we were most concerned about and it took us a while to locate her, was a psychologist working for one of our partner organizations. So even the frontline staff who should be delivering the assistance are impacted and displaced themselves, and indeed themselves traumatized. So we're trying to look at how to also support these frontline workers. How can they deliver services to children when they themselves have been so brutally impacted every day? They're living the same reality.
How are you doing? I understand this is your job, and it's a difficult question to ask in the middle of a television interview, but how are you coping with it all?
Well, as UNICEF, we've put a lot of measures in place to support all of the staff, both national and international staff are here, especially for our Lebanese colleagues. It's very, very difficult. They're very brave, and we're all together on the front lines every day. But it is very difficult for colleagues. 40 of them themselves have been displaced, have had to relocate their families to so-called safer areas. They're living in temporary accommodation or with families and friends or in hotels. So it goes back to the point of when everyone in society is impacted, but the team do what they can, and we do the best with the resources that we have. But it's very, very, very difficult to speak to a mother with 6 children living on the street and tell her that you don't have the resources to be able to provide safe shelter and accommodation, clothing, food, and everything that she needs, and healthcare for her children, simply because the need is so immense. So we now have more than 1.2 million people displaced, on top of a crisis already with the Syrian refugees, where we have Lebanon hosting more than 1.5 million Syrian refugees for over a decade. And that's also on top of the economic meltdown that Lebanon has suffered over the past 5 years. So it really is becoming more catastrophic by the day.
Was there, just returning to last night's attack, was there warning of that attack? Because when we've spoken previously to various guests, they've talked about the psychological terror of the warnings you receive over WhatsApp or other messaging services from the Israeli forces asking you to leave an area because they're about to strike. Was there a warning before this one?
To our knowledge, no, there was no warning. But even when in the past attacks there has been warnings that have been received, maybe it's arrived at 2 or 3 in the morning. So families are asleep, children are asleep, there is not enough time to move. And also these are very densely populated areas, and it's very, very difficult. There's tens of thousands of extra cars that have come with displaced people from different parts of the country to Beirut. So even for families to move around easily is very difficult. When there is a warning, their chances of being able to seek safety are very, very, very difficult with the conditions. And as well as that, for example, in some of the Palestinian camps, it's also very difficult. The streets are narrow alleyways, and they're not wide enough for cars, including rescue vehicles, to pass through. So those families have told us it's very, very difficult for them to escape. So what they're doing is they're maybe going to their house and getting belongings during the day, and then they're going to sleep out in the open, maybe on the sides of streets, where they think that they will be safer, rather than going back to their homes that might be in a high-risk area of bombardment.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the pressure that the healthcare system is feeling. Talk to us about what the hospitals are really dealing with. You're talking there about inaccessibility of certain roads as well. I mean, how much pressure are the hospitals under?
Well, so far we've had 12 hospitals that have been attacked, and 4 of them are now no longer operational. We have dozens of primary healthcare centres that are also no longer operational. We've had disruptions in the supply chain getting medicines into Lebanon. We have disruptions in the local supply chain to make the medicines. So we're seeing shortages of essential commodities become more and more frequent. We're seeing a targeting of healthcare workers. We've had more than 120 deaths of different healthcare workers, and a particular escalation in the past 3 weeks. And so what we received a request this morning from the Ministry of Health to provide support to increase the number of hospitals to be able to deal with trauma. So currently UNICEF is working closely with the World Health Organization to support hospitals to receive more of these acute trauma cases, including acute pediatric cases that are coming in with very complicated injuries that will require long-term treatment, such as burns. And we saw, for example, several children that are going to require long-term support. So on Sunday, we flew in another 25 metric tons of medical supplies, and we're working as well with the government and with the World Health Organization to see if we can get more health workers to come in and rotate, because the ones that are here on the ground are simply exhausted and in many cases unable to report for duty because they have been displaced themselves. So it's an ongoing struggle to try to keep the health system functioning to the best capacity to meet the increase in needs and deal with the increasingly complicated injuries that we're seeing. One of the pediatric doctors that I spoke to this morning spoke of the difficulty in treating the wounds for some of the children, because when the children with shrapnel who have been hit in some of the bombardments come to the hospital, the complicated way that the shrapnel injures the child's body means that there is a lot of internal injuries, because the weaponry used continues to damage as it enters the child's body. So these kind of cases do require long-term and very careful support, not just for the physical well-being of the child, but also to help the child to live with these life-changing injuries as well.
Yeah, it's just horrifying to hear about, and I can only imagine to deal with on a daily basis at the moment for those affected. Look, we're hearing more about winter. And for those elsewhere in the world, they might think, oh, it's the Middle East, how cold can it get? But Lebanon really does have a winter, and the conditions are going to be even more difficult. Talk to us about that.
Well, whereas exactly the image of the Middle East is that there are no very harsh winters, but in fact Lebanon has a lot of snow in the higher areas, and this feeds into the water systems of the country, so it does get very, very cold. And so now we have hundreds of thousands of people who are living in substandard shelters. Some of them have moved into tents or are living on the sides of roads, as I mentioned, or are living in some sort of informal settlements or semi-finished buildings, and none of these have heating. So we know that in previous years, when people are subjected to this kind of cold, we see, and they're not used to it and they're not prepared for it, we see increases in respiratory illnesses for children, and in acute cases as well, especially when there's sub-zero temperatures. We see cases of hypothermia, especially amongst the younger children, the babies and under twos. So this hypothermia can be fatal, especially if families are not able to bring their child to healthcare facilities. So it's essential that we prepare with the shelter, the heating, the fuel, and importantly, the winter clothing. So we're bringing in $2 million worth of supplies to purchase winter clothing kits for children. And these are now being transported to Lebanon. But to give you an idea of how we have had to borrow the resources from our headquarters because we simply have no resources at all to be able to deal with winter. So there's really an acute underfunding, and currently our appeal is funded at less than 9%. So I think we unfortunately will see cases of hypothermia and deaths of children unless we're able to mobilize a large-scale winterization campaign, as we call it, to prepare for the very cold weeks and months ahead.
Listen, wishing you a lot of strength for the coming days ahead. And thank you once again for joining us from Beirut, Deputy Representative of UNICEF, Etty Higgins.
Thank you.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm now joined from Beirut by the Lebanese Independent MP, Mark Dow. Just talk to us for a moment, if you don't mind, about what last night and what yesterday was like for those of you in Beirut.
This is the second strike on the city of Beirut, like the center of the city. The first one was a week ago that targeted one apartment. But this is the first destruction of a complete building in a poor neighborhood that many families that have run away from the south for protection have taken shelter in. Those are all buildings in one of the neighborhoods close to Beirut's pretty like city center. And unfortunately, this was terrifying. Like today, we're getting reports that people are even afraid of staying in the capital. And believe me, there's no place left in this country for people to run to, especially if the capital that hosts the majority of those displaced is targeted. This could mean a humanitarian catastrophe in Lebanon.
Well, indeed, we're hearing about huge waves of displacement, obviously, over the last fortnight. Around 1.3 million people displaced already, and many people are reportedly flooding into Beirut from other areas of Lebanon. So what happens then?
We already have public parks. We have the seaside areas, the beaches. They're all full with people. People are living under sheets all across the city. There was an attempt to try and organize all of those to get them into shelters, but most of the shelters are already full. So we're trying to transfer people to the north of the country where it is safer for sure and where there is more space available in public schools and refugee centers. But if Beirut is targeted by the Israelis on regular basis and people panic and leave the city, there is no place in Lebanon that can take them in. We already have about 400,000 people from Lebanon who have crossed into Syria, of whom 300,000 are Syrian refugees or displaced people who were in Lebanon and went back to their country, but 100,000 are Lebanese. And we're afraid of that becoming a flood, especially after the Israelis also bombed the main crossing between Lebanon and Syria and are trying to impose a lot of restrictions on people's movement across the border.
Talk to me about what you can do at the moment as an MP. What role are you playing? I mean, tell me, because I don't know. Is political process essentially paused? Are you more in a kind of relief and aid and support role?
Yeah, definitely being an MP today is deprived of any glorious moments. It's all about fighting to help people out. And I think our main responsibility as MPs is to make sure you stay united away from civil strife and away from friction that is generated by the intensity and the anxiety and the riskiness of the entire situation. I think our role as MPs today is to head directly to Parliament, elect a president that people can rally around, and then form a new government with full authority so that government can issue orders to the army and to deal with this crisis and apply emergency measures. Currently, Lebanon has no president for the past 2 years, and we have a caretaker government that barely functions and has been in place for 3 years. Me as a parliamentarian and all of us in parliament have been elected to protect the people and serve them. Therefore, our role is to go to parliament. Unfortunately, there are still political parties who think that they can use the current situation to undermine electing a president as a tool of negotiating for a ceasefire or negotiating for a regional deal. But the reality is we need to take care of our own country, and members of parliament have to do their duty by making sure the state is fully functional with people elected and in place with the authority and legitimacy to take on the challenges and solve people's problems.
That was going to be my next question, whether there is still political game playing, essentially, and I know that's a bad word to use at the moment, but going on internally in Lebanon throughout this crisis, because that is a big demand from the US as well, that there is an election of a president in the US. There was reports earlier in the week that President Biden was seeking to basically pressure Lebanon somehow into electing a president. I mean, talk to us about how that would actually work. Would it work right now?
there is consensus among the international community to demand the election of a president, because also any ceasefire agreement, any international agreement requires a president to represent the state and to sign on its behalf. In our constitution, the president is the person who represents the state. Therefore, it is fundamental for that. Not only that, when we elect a president, we'll be able to form a government with full authority that can negotiate the terms, that can address the issues with being able to do commitments, since it has the support of parliament, since there is a president to work with. And I do understand the priority, because that is our priority as well, that creating and setting up a functioning state in Lebanon would allow for the quick resolution and achievement of a ceasefire and end to the war. There are perspectives supported by Hezbollah and their allies that still believe that ceasefire is rewarded by electing a president, forming a government, which I think is a disaster, a strategic failure, instead of unity within the state that represents us. They still consider themselves to be the party to negotiate with, and the state only comes after they take what they want.
That's a very difficult situation to be in. And even so, I mean, because to our viewers who aren't familiar with the complex makeup of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and people are getting a lot more familiar with it now, international viewers, and how it's become so embedded as part of Lebanese political classes and public life and everything else. But at the same time, the Hezbollah's command structure has been absolutely decimated by Israel in the past few weeks. That being said, Hezbollah said they're preparing for a long war of attrition in the south. How strong do you think Hezbollah political parties feel right now in terms of making those types of demands?
I think Hezbollah is in a corner and they can't back down anymore. And I do understand if the Israelis are threatening to occupy parts of our land, the Lebanese need to stand steadfast and make sure we don't lose any part of our country. And that is the main challenge that we face. We do not want an Israeli invasion and refuse that. We can deal with our internal politics. I think Hezbollah needs to recognize that they cannot lead this war endlessly at the expense of Lebanese and without no political solution in sight. So they have two options. They either wait till Iran negotiates something suitable for Iran, and then Hezbollah follows through because they are sponsored and supported by Iran, which wouldn't be a Lebanese agenda, it would be an Iranian hegemonic agenda. Or Hezbollah can decide to meet other Lebanese parties halfway and in parliament and say, we want to decide with other Lebanese and we'll inform the Iranians and the others of our decision. I think till now, Hezbollah continues to believe that they are standing and fighting, waiting for further instruction from the Iranians.
In terms of Iran and how that support is going for Hezbollah at the moment, how do you assess that to be?
I think the Iranians haven't been much of a support to Hezbollah. I think even the Iranians were surprised by the swift destruction of the leadership of Hezbollah and their military capabilities in literally 2 weeks after decades of investing in the party. So I'm sure somewhere in Iran, they're reconsidering the purpose of investing billions of dollars in militias to fight wars they're incapable of. And then what we ended up with is where we started, local guerrillas fighting to defend our land from being occupied. Everything else was just shattered in days. And I really believe that the entire approach of Iran of using local militias in various countries as tools for its foreign policy has been massively destroyed at the expense of Lebanon and Gaza and other places, because those countries, the living standard is not improving. People are not defended. There's no deterrence against Israeli aggression and criminality. So what we ended up with was just building militias that threaten other countries, that threaten internally, and other politicians in Lebanon, especially those who are against the Iranian axis, And then at the end of the day, they serve no purpose for protecting Lebanon or developing its economy or protecting its people.
Let's talk for a moment about peacekeepers in Lebanon, especially in southern Lebanon, and the issues there with regards to Israeli attacks on Israeli forces firing on a watchtower used by UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon today. I mean, what did you make of those reports, and do you think this will change anything?
I think the Israelis, the more they get dragged into this war, the more they will be further desperate and will become more random, and the chances of even errors happening will increase. The last time they committed a catastrophic genocidal act by bombing a UN shelter, killing 140 people back in 1996. They constantly, in every conflict between Lebanon and Israel, there has always been massive hits on the United Nations forces in south of Lebanon that have been in the country since 1978. And they have sacrificed lives, and they perform a courageous act by registering all the violations. They do not shoot back at anyone. Those people are there to supervise the peace and make sure that they are giving proper reports and proper coverage so everyone can be cautious and safe from escalating. Unfortunately, the Israelis are not being held back. This is not the first time they're attacking. And unfortunately, this time it was a very dangerous attack. If they continue down this track, there are, I think, close to 40 nationalities among the 15,000 soldiers among the United Nations force, mostly Europeans, Italians, French, and Spanish, and Polish, and others. So, and the Irish have a lot of people who sacrificed their lives defending Lebanon in the sense of serving in the United Nations. There's, I think the post that was struck was manned by soldiers from Sri Lanka. So in the end, the Israelis are just bombing left, right, and center by now in the south.
And as you and I have been talking, an update has been delivered that there are claims that, I believe this is coming from the Israeli military side, that the UN peacekeepers were inadvertently hurt whilst Israeli forces were in combat against Hezbollah. Is that something that you can conceive to be the truth?
I wouldn't believe a military dispatch in the middle of a war. I would rather have a ceasefire and an investigation. Up till then, it's all war propaganda.
In terms of the way I know it's difficult at this point to think into the future, but in terms of relations between Israel and Lebanon here on out, I mean, how much damage is being done at the moment?
I think the best solution for both sides is to go back to an armistice agreement that clearly defines the border, sets limits on the Lebanese army and the Israeli army monitoring each side of the border, along with support from the United Nations. Fighting this war will achieve nothing except a lot of more destruction and a lot more animosity. I believe we need to immediately stop this war, sign an armistice deal like the one we signed back in 1949 that gave us decades of peace on both sides of the border. We need to rebuild our country, Lebanon, and this requires that we are united behind electing a president, forming a government, and having no weapons other than those held by the official Lebanese army monitoring our eastern, northern, and southern borders. We want to live in peace, and I think the Israelis need to believe that fighting will get them nowhere. They've been fighting in Gaza for a year, and that will never achieve peace for them. They're doing the same mistake in Lebanon, and along the way, I think those mistakes will keep on piling on top of Israel, and the track record of killings and death will not reflect well on any outcome that will provide a permanent peace for everyone.
And before we get to the armistice agreement, you're suggesting there is revisited, presumably need to hit that ceasefire agreement first. And as you mentioned earlier in our discussion, Hezbollah are trying to use that as a negotiating point before the election of a president, if I understood you correctly. What is the other alternative? How do we get to a point where a ceasefire could start to be negotiated alongside or even before or after the election of a president in Lebanon?
There's already been a mechanism. A year ago, we were able to reach an agreement with the Israelis via the UN and US intermediation. And we were able to define our sea border between us and them in an agreement that was registered at United Nations. I think we can do the same approach. Lebanon and the current government have said they are ready to start negotiations. The Israelis so far have refused. And we're hoping that at some point in time, the international community would pressure Israel enough to send a delegation and to start a negotiation as the previous negotiations have been done. We've negotiated several ceasefires, but the most important is an armistice deal, which is more advanced than a ceasefire that defines the terms of maintaining the peace. We negotiated one in 1949. I'm sure we can negotiate one in 2024.
And just in terms of international support, do you feel like you are receiving enough support at the moment from your allies?
So far, not. There has been a good response from some Arab countries, but unfortunately, the flash appeal sent out by the government to the international community has yet to produce satisfactory results. People are about to go into a winter, and winter in Lebanon is harsh. It snows, it rains, and people will feel the pinch. They left their homes in the south and in Dahi, in the southern suburbs and other places when it was summertime. Now they've been in shelters for a month. The weather is changing, and they need to get to schools, they need to get to hospitals, they need to get clothing so they can survive the winter. And I think there's a lot of shortage in international support to Lebanon at this moment.
And you mentioned there your concerns for winter. How about your concerns for this weekend? What are you most worried about?
I'm worried about, after the strike on Beirut yesterday, that we start seeing a pattern of the Israelis going into highly populated areas on the excuse of suspecting Hezbollah leaders to be present. I think the Israelis have decimated the military leadership of Hezbollah, but now if they intend on expanding into the political or other leaders who do not lead the fighting or the war, then we might be looking at a serious change in Israelis' objective from protecting their northern border, as they declared, to something closer to the Gaza scenario, the objective of eliminating Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is supported by the Lebanese in several areas, which is very concerning, because what happens then is we're going to get a much larger war and a lot more destruction in a random chase of an officer here, a member of parliament there, or whatever. This is very concerning for us. Again, we go back to the starting point. If Beirut has to be evacuated, we're going to have a massive humanitarian crisis in Lebanon.
Mark Dow, Lebanese independent MP, we appreciate you making time for us.
Thank you.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has expressed hope for a diplomatic solution in Lebanon and supported the country's efforts to stand up to Hezbollah. He reiterated that Israel has the right to defend itself against Hezbollah, but also raised concerns about the worsening humanitarian situation in Lebanon. But how will the US's role in the Middle East shape the country's foreign policy and the upcoming presidential election? Let's find out more about that now. I'm joined by the former speechwriter to President Ronald Reagan, Clark Judge. Sir, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. And let's begin with those comments from Mr. Blinken, shall we? Talking about, of course, Israel having the right to defend itself against Hezbollah, but also trying to moderate that and have this kind of influence, the US, to say, well, don't completely decimate Lebanon while you're doing it. What did you make of that?
Well, it's consistent with the position of the US for a long time. Israel has been attacked before. Not quite. This is unusual in the recent period, but our country has always said that Israel has a right to protect itself, defend itself, as does any country, and that trying to find a way middle ground. Most successfully, the middle ground was found during the development of the Abraham Accords of the last administration. And I'm confident that the United States wants to keep the strength of those going.
In terms of where the United States sits in terms of having a role in the Middle East, do you think it does still have an influential role? And how does that play back home for voters in the US?
Well, yes, it's clear it has an influential role. Whether it chooses to exercise that or not is a question. There's belief in the United States that in some quarters at least, and certainly in Republican quarters, that Mr. Biden hasn't been assertive enough and strong enough in supporting Israel. But as to politics in the United States, as you know, or I presume you know, the American system is a system not of massive majoritarianism as so far as presidential elections go, but of majorities in each, or pluralities in each state. And the states differ. Some states have groups that are very supportive of the current administration. Others have states that are not. And I mean that in terms of the Middle East as well. What is, I think it's fair to say that the American people want the United States to remain strong and decisive. And one of the big questions in the current election is whether it has been strong and decisive under President Biden, and whether it would continue to be strong and decisive under either Vice President Harris or President Trump. This is a central issue in this election.
I mean, let's talk about that, strong and decisive, because when you were in the administration of Ronald Reagan, who, of course, took a very strong and decisive role when it came to confronting the Soviet Union, amongst other things, you know, Ronald Reagan's foreign policy is absolutely fascinating to consider looking back. When you think about the US having a strong and decisive role now, do you think that is Trump or Harris?
I think it's pretty clear that Harris would follow the Biden policies, and Mr. Trump would be at once very strongly supportive of Israel, at the same time reaching to reinvigorate the Abraham Accords.
In terms of how they do handle world politics, we've had some fascinating revelations just this week in a book by veteran journalist Bob Woodward, a Watergate journalist, and I can see you sort of nodding on there. I mean, obviously, I don't expect you've read the whole copy yet, but I'm sure you've seen some of the highlights from it. It's been widely discussed. It's been absolutely fascinating if what is written in there is true in terms of how Biden views people like Putin and Netanyahu, labeling them both bad guys, essentially, but also how Trump has faced off against Putin as well. Some people said he was just the man to stand up and be strong against Putin, but at the same time has had several phone calls, allegedly, since leaving office with Putin, sent him a COVID testing machine. I mean, broadly, did you see anything new out of this book that you were surprised about?
Whether he is nice or tough personally with someone has a lot to do with how he sees a negotiation going. He, once a negotiation is over, he's, in some respects, he's a different man. He's just, we had our disagreements or agreements, and now it's done, and let's move on to the next thing. It's been misread in this country, and I think overseas, to see his relations with Putin as personal, in a personal way, as indicating anything about the policies he'll follow. The policies, his treatment of foreign leaders personally is goes in how he sees the possibilities and the what he sees is required to have a constructive negotiation.
So you're essentially saying he comes at the role of being president much as he would a businessman in a negotiation room, which of course is his background.
Absolutely true. And by the way, Ronald Reagan was much that way. He wasn't. He didn't have quite the. Wasn't quite as vocal about people if he was critical. But Ronald Reagan was a labor negotiator, a labor union negotiator before he was entered politics. Very effective one. Donald Trump is a business negotiator, a very effective one. The men in between have not been had those kinds of experiences. The media is made up of people who basically don't understand those kinds of dynamics. And so you have to take a look at, keep an eye on Trump with that in mind.
Really interesting. Look, in terms of the way Ronald Reagan would have dealt with this differently, we'd be remiss not to ask you that, given your personal experience and professional experience with the man. How would he have dealt what's currently going on in the world, not only with 2 wars going on, but just huge shifts of power?
Well, we had huge shifts of power during our administration in that the Soviet Union essentially collapsed a few months or a year or two after we went out of office, but they were on the way to that at the time. I would say that Mr. Reagan, the rough edges of Trump's style were not part of Mr. Reagan's portfolio. He could be stern, but it wouldn't go beyond that. Mr. Trump takes a more public, not just sternness, but criticism. But he's very candid about what he's trying to achieve, and will, in that sense, both are very similar. Their objectives, in advance. They're very candid about them, and the personal and official relationships should be viewed in terms of where a negotiation is at that time, and with an eye towards what the objective is. In all cases, it's in both Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Reagan's case, the objectives have been fairly consistent in this area: support of Israel, desire to have peace in the Middle East, among countries willing to be our friends, so that they are more secure among themselves, and opposition to those countries that are sworn enemies.
Just finally, Mr. Judge, in terms of where Ukraine is at the moment, President Zelenskyy in Berlin today has been laying out his victory plan, as he calls it. I mean, do you see that there might be an end in sight?
There might be, but it's hard to see quite how how Mr. Putin backs out of this. My own view is that Mr. Putin is probably the worst strategist in the world. He has traded a secure Western border for an insecure. He's made his Western border a center of insecurity, of conflict. He's made what was once a very placid eastern border with China very vulnerable. There are actual Chinese populations within Russia. The Chinese have shown a certain interest in them. They are showing some interest in having more control.
We're just
reported, but it has been discussed in official journals. And Mr. Putin's I'm sorry.
My apologies, Mr. Judge. Look, we are just losing connection with you there, but want to thank you very much for your time today. That is the former speechwriter and special assistant to President Ronald Reagan, Clark Judge. Let's get more now on the conflict between Israeli forces and Hezbollah with the former British Armed Forces Minister in David Cameron's government, Lord Andrew Rowbotham. Thank you very much for making time. And just give us your sense, as it is from the moment from where you are in the UK, of the Israeli military action in Lebanon. What does it look like to you in terms of strategy?
Well, I think the first thing to be said, if I might, is that the world is the most dangerous it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, with Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East, obviously, and Iran, and the malign influence of Iran, and indeed whatever is likely to happen in China. And this is pretty worrying stuff, never mind North Korea. What it looks like to me is this. Hezbollah have established themselves in Lebanon. As we know, Lebanon, as I'm sure you're aware, Lebanon has a fairly patchy system of, put it bluntly, system of government where people seem to disagree with each other and murder each other quite a lot. Hezbollah has established itself as an authority in parts of Lebanon, which is not to the benefit of the Lebanese people. And they have been lobbing rockets into northern Israel now since October 7th last year, and before that, indeed. Is the Israeli incursion justified? I would say yes. Is it wise? There, I'm not sure. Look, none of us, including, I'm sure, Israel and anybody else in the Middle East, really wants this to escalate. But if you have, as we have had, this 300 or whatever rocket attack on Israel, they have always shown strength by always never taking anything like that lying down. So I don't know. I go back to my point about the malign influence of Iran. I don't know what the link with the current situation is, but Hezbollah and Hamas and indeed the Houthis in the Red Sea in Yemen have been very definitely funded and directed by Iran.
So in terms of Israel's right to self-defence, which of course the UK government still stands by, the US government still stands by, big allies of Israel, saying it does have that right to self-defence, but then also asking for proportionate responses. We heard that a year ago with post-October 7th and the horrors that entailed. What does a proportionate response look like? We had those discussions a year ago. Well, now we are awaiting a response still, really, a sort of big directed response to the Iranian missile attack on Israel a week ago. So what are your concerns for that? What would it look like?
I mean, I think we should all be very, very concerned about it. However, if I were in Israel, and obviously I'm not, I would say now is the time actually to attack Iran itself, which has attacked Israel, and that includes the nuclear development facilities they have. Easy to say, very difficult to do because most of them are deep underground. But you know, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, which it is, I understand, quite close to getting, that threatens the whole Middle East. And actually, Russia, which has probably, I don't know, been giving new nuclear technology to Iran, Russia will be threatened as well, because Iran is not necessarily an ally of Russia. It's an ally of convenience, in my opinion. Although, I mean, I'm not out there, I don't know exactly, but I think this is a terrifying time. But if I were in Israel, I would want the response to be one that was fairly final. By the way, you know, the Iranian people are terribly oppressed. And I was in Iran just before the so-called Green Revolution in 2009. The Iranian people are in the most terrible situation. And it's not impossible that there's a large number of people who would like to see the back of the theocratic regime in Khamenei. What do I know, sitting in Leicestershire? But I do think that it would be to the benefit of the whole world if Iran were to return to what looked at one stage that it might have quite a democratic government. I mean, Iran is a pretty modern country. That was what struck me when I got there, with a sort of new underground system around Tehran and things. It's quite a rich country, and it's being beggared by sanctions. And this is not to the benefit of the people of Iran, nor is it the benefit of the people of Iran to have women arrested by the religious police and dying in their custody. You know, this is not something that in the West we find in any way acceptable, and I'm very sorry. One last thing I'd say about Iran, which is, as I said, the malign influence in the Middle East, one of the malign influences in the Middle East, is that I remember talking to ministers in Iran, and they'd look me in the eye and say, actually, black is white. I said, no, it's not. No, black is white. They lied through their teeth. So I don't think one can really rely on anything very much that's said by Iranian ministers.
Well, as you've mentioned there, standards and ways of living that aren't that don't really align with what we do in Western countries. You and I, of course, are both from the UK. You can tell by our accents. But in terms of actually intervening in Iran, which is what I'm getting from your response there, you actually are suggesting that it would be good to attack Iran. I'm not
I'm not suggesting we intervene, but I understand why the Israelis might wish to pursue this, their response to a fairly a final conclusion with regarding the nuclear facilities. Back in about 1980, I think it was, Israel launched an attack on the Iraqi nuclear facilities when Saddam Hussein was developing a weapon and destroyed it. And everybody in the West said, oh, that's shocking. Actually, it was pretty sensible. Now, look, I don't want to see escalation. It would be nice to think that everybody could calm down and make peace with each other. But I think that would be very wishful thinking.
It does seem very far from that at the moment. In terms of if there was an attack on nuclear or energy facilities, it sounds like many allied countries to Israel have been advising against that, saying, please don't do that. A proportionate response is warranted to last week's missile attack, but don't target those nuclear and energy sites. I suppose for fear not only of wider ramifications of that type of attack, but of further regional instability and the need for Western forces to get involved, to get the US involved in Iran. Do you think that's an issue?
I think the idea of Western forces, British or American or the wider West, getting involved in a war with Iran are very slim. I really just don't think it will happen. Not impossible, of course. We unwisely invaded Iraq in the Second Gulf War. We unwisely sent the NATO force ISAF to Afghanistan, which I think means that actually we're once bitten, or several times bitten, many times shy. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it is not necessarily particularly helpful for Biden to say, oh, it has to be a proportionate response. What is a proportionate response? What happens if Iran gets a nuclear weapon? Israel, of course, already has nuclear weapons, although they don't declare them. What happens? And it might be better if, the best thing of all would be if the good people of Iran deposed this ghastly regime, including the IRGC, which is a most corrupt and evil organization, rich as Croesus, of course, and living off the backs of the poor people of Iran. That would be the best thing, but I don't think it's going to happen. So one has to say, well, what is the least bad outcome? And my view might be that if Iran were disabled in its nuclear intent by Israel, that would not be a bad thing for the West either. But I don't think it's that likely to happen, actually, because I think it'd be very difficult to do. But if I were in Israel, if I were an Israeli, I would be thinking, well, what is the long-term future of this country? And by the way, we could go and discuss a two-state solution, all that sort of thing. But I think just on this specific issue, I think I would wish to see Iran actually defeated.
Yeah, I mean, elsewhere in the show, we are talking to Lebanese MP about, the power of Hezbollah currently in southern Lebanon, particularly in the rest of the country as well. Politically, we're speaking to people about the aid recovery. And speaking to you is particularly interesting because you have this wide view geopolitically of what you think is happening to the world power axis-wise. So I want to ask you some more about that in your first answer when you mentioned Iran and Russia and their relationship, because Russia's Vladimir Putin was having talks in Turkmenistan today with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, and they hailed their growing economic ties, similar views on world affairs. No surprises there. They've been long-term allies, Iran and Russia. But do you feel like, from your position where you're looking on from the UK as a military expert, that the balance of power is shifting in the world?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on anything. But what I would say is I think the balance of power has shifted, but not completely. I think what's important is that the West, and of course whether we like it or not, we're led by America, whoever may lead America in the future. The West stands fast. Actually, Putin is not that secure. Putin is not winning that war particularly. He is being helped by Iran with some sort of suicide drones, and don't ask me to remember the name. Putin is pretty stretched actually in the war in Ukraine, and has lost, they say, and I can't verify this, 10 times more people than the Russians lost in Afghanistan. The defeat in Afghanistan was to a certain extent why the old Soviet regime collapsed. So is there a shift in power? I think Iran wishes to be the premier power in the Middle East, to reassert the old Persian empire, not necessarily imperially, but to be the influence in the Middle East and the leader in the Middle East, which is definitely not to the taste of the Arab states in the Gulf. And Russia wishes to reestablish the Tsarist, or indeed the Soviet empire. Now, this is frightening stuff as we sit in comfort. You aren't, I don't think, sitting in comfort in the UK, but this is frightening stuff. These people are quite serious about what they want to do. And we have been, I'm afraid, very complacent over decades, since 1990, not realizing that, if you may remember, the first George Bush said, we're now in a new world order. And there was huge optimism that actually everybody would get on a little bit better after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, that does not appear to have happened. As I say again, this is the most dangerous time of our lives, the Western lives, since 1962.
Lord Andrew Robotham speaking to us from the UK, former Armed Forces Minister there. Thank you. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence, they've got to have a vote and a say. It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Budapest. Many would consider Budapest a favorite city in Europe. It boasts of great architecture comparable to none, and lets us in on its sophisticated scene that's impossible for any other city to imitate. Here are some things you'll appreciate about Budapest. A visit to the city's thermal baths is a must. Try soaking in the Széchenyi baths, although of course there are countless other baths to choose from. A cruise via the Danube River is another thing you must do in Budapest. Nighttime is the best time to try this. There are special cruises being offered, as ways to maximize your scenic trip along the river. For one, you can have a buffet-style dinner cruise while on board. Definitely a feast for the eyes, but may become an educational tour for you too. One of the greatest bridges in the world is Budapest's Chain Bridge. It's the best place in the city for romantic evening strolls. It has a well-known story behind it too. The architect who had created it was greatly proud of his work that he challenged anyone to find fault in the bridge. It was soon discovered that the lions that stand guard at the opposite ends are missing their tongues, and his genius work remains forever. Budapest is also known for its great undergrounds. The labyrinth of Buda Castle is one of the 7 wonders of the underground world. The place has also got many stories to tell, having closed down in 2011, but has already reopened. There are also many cave systems along Budapest to tour, for both a learning and travel experience. There are also wine cellars in the city, which are part of the vast labyrinth system winding beneath Buda Castle. The cellars vary, but are all suitable for wine tasting. It's an experience to learn more about their wine culture, for both learning and travel experience. For shopping, there's the Central Market Hall. Here you'll find the typical Hungarian products. You'll find everything there, from the world-famous sausages, paprika, to their wines. Fresh vegetables are also among the great buys in the market. You'll also find great souvenirs to buy there, such as wares and traditional Hungarian embroidery.
Thank you so much for joining me. Walk me through how you see the situation in Ukraine today.
Well, I'm just back from my 4th trip there in the last 16 or 17 months. I think it's a quite challenging situation. Ukraine has had some very solid achievements. On the Black Sea, they've sunk over 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea fleet without major surface combatants. So they didn't do it with their Navy, they did it with aerial drones that find the ships and then maritime drones that they made that have been sinking them. And that forced the Russians out of the western Black Sea, forced them to pull their remaining ship from Sevastopol, centuries-old port in western Crimea, and opens it up for the maritime export of grain, Ukrainian grain being about 25% of the world's exports, very significant. On the ground, they did the Kursk offensive, remarkable, achieved total surprise despite assembling over 4 brigades of not just armor and artillery and infantry, but also air defense, electronic warfare, signal, engineers, and of course all the logistics required for that with drones over top of them. And they still hold not quite 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, though the Russians are now just finally responding. But it's on the front lines that the challenges are really most considerable. The Russians are achieving incremental gains on a daily basis, very costly for them, showing many of the shortcomings of the Russian system with just throwing soldiers into the line, using human wave attacks, much of which the Ukrainians are countering with unmanned systems. They don't have the manpower, and they've got to generate more from their conscription process. But what they're doing to make up for that is throwing machines at the Russians instead of men.
Drones.
Drones. Also now starting to introduce ground robotic systems. They're going to have robotic dogs. They have remotely piloted vehicles, even remotely piloted machine guns. But again, the front lines are worrisome. And to enable Ukraine going forward, the U.S., the West, what we've got to do is help Ukraine change the dynamics of this war, without which no resolution is possible. Putin has to become convinced that he cannot achieve further gains at an acceptable cost. That cost has to be made just too high, even for someone who seems unconcerned by his own soldiers giving their lives. That's the dynamic that has to be changed, and it can only come about through a combination of different factors: continued EU support in aggregate, individual European countries, U.S. and other Western support, and the Ukrainians continue their advances in very innovative unmanned systems, additional drone battalions. They're cranking those out about every month, but they have to, again, increase their conscription and then training and equipping of individual soldiers for replacements, and then also new units that can capitalize on equipment, weapon systems sent from the West. That's really critical, and that's what needs to be the focus as Ukraine enters what is going to be a very tough winter. Russia has destroyed every thermal power plant in the country, has damaged or destroyed every hydroelectric power plant, and now they're systematically going after the transmission capacity from the nuclear power plants. So it's going to be a long, cold, dark, hard winter for Ukraine, and we also need to be doing everything we can to help them get through that winter. And there's a lot of effort ongoing in that regard.
How
helping
worried
them with
about
repairs.
that are you?
Very worried. I mean, this is tough.
And beyond that, how worried are you about the continuing support of the American people? Because obviously this has become an issue at the ballot box.
I think that there is very strong bipartisan support on Capitol Hill in the United States to support Ukraine. Obviously, depending on the outcome of the election, we'll see how enthusiastic those in the White House are. But again, because of that bipartisan support, regardless of who it is, I think you're going to see continued robust support for Ukraine, although one occupant of the White House might be a bit more enthusiastic about it than the other possibility. But I think it's going to continue. I think European support will continue, even though there are cracks in individual countries, by and large, very, very strong. And it really comes down then to some decisions, U.S. to lift the restrictions on its longer range missiles that have been provided to Ukraine, accelerating the provision of some other items, and Ukraine, again, generating more in terms of conscripts and building out the actual institutions to do that. Because so far in the war, they've largely been employing those who were in service at the time of this latest invasion, and then those who patriotically came to the service of their country.
Tell me this, how much danger are we in from a nuclear reaction from Vladimir Putin?
I think it's unlikely, but I think it's something you have to be concerned about. And obviously, it's easy for us here to dismiss that possibility. It's much tougher if you're actually in a seat in the Situation Room of the West Wing of the White House. I've sat there. The responsibility is a lot more real, needless to say, although I still think that it has been overblown. Ukraine has blown through every Russian red line, and Putin has been cautioned personally and publicly by China and India. Both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have said, don't do this. And I think that weighs very heavily in the balance for him. Beyond that, what do you do with, how do you use this?
Yeah.
A tactical
Where do you
nuclear
go from
weapon,
there?
It actually, where you go from there is you are this, even more of a pariah than you already are.
Yeah, I was just in Moscow, as you know. I was speaking to Alexander Novak, the deputy prime minister. He runs the energy file as well as the economic file. You know, the Russians are touting their economic growth last year and this year. For them,
well, it's all because they're just plowing everything into their military industrial
You've
complex.
seen this report of 27% going to military spending.
It's even more than that now,
Yeah.
apparently this year. But, then ask the people how they like that as they watch their social services decline. In a country that already was not that strong in that regard, it
How
has
do
a
you
lot
see
of
the
people on
impact
fixed income.
About the from an oil perspective with these depressed prices?
I mean, the problem, of course, is that they are still able to find customers for their oil, even at lower prices, to be sure, which is generally good for the world. Although, of course, the biggest producer of oil and natural gas now is, of course, the United States. So this cuts both ways. But no, you have to be concerned about possibilities with Russia, but they should not paralyze you. And this delay in deciding to allow the full use of the weapon systems that we're providing on Russian soil, when Ukraine is already doing that with its own munitions, is, again, that escapes me.
I want to ask you specifically about, in the last several days, obviously, the extraordinary feat by the Israelis in taking out senior Hamas officials.
This is unprecedented. There's never been an operation like this.
Is it something you could have conceived as former head of the CIA? From blowing up their pagers to their radios to getting them?
You can conceive of supply chain operations, and without being specific, we conducted a number of very successful supply chain operations during the war on terror and so forth, and other endeavors. This is just so unprecedented in its scale, scope, effectiveness, and just sheer diabolical creativity. Keep in mind that the people who had the pagers were the most important leaders in Hezbollah. That was a badge of honor, of importance.
Yes.
I'm sure they were fighting to have a pager. And then all of a sudden, thousands of them blow up. So wounding, killing dozens, and then wounding many, many more. Yeah. And also rendering that particular communication system
obsolete.
Yes.
Almost
immediately.
And
then, of course, the next fallback was walkie-talkies, and they begin to blow up. Yeah. And they'd already stopped using cell phones because they believed the Israelis could geolocate them on those. So how they've lost their command, control, and communication system. They cannot coordinate the response to Israel in the way that they would have likely. And the big concern, of course, has been that Hezbollah had at the start of this war assessed somewhere around 150,000 various types of missiles, rockets, drones, and so on, which, if they could coordinate a massive quantity at one time, could overwhelm the very sophisticated air and ballistic missile defense system of Israel, of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, Patriot, and some others. And that's a concern. And yet Hezbollah has generally been unable to do that, in part because its communication system has been devastated, really. This is not just a decapitation, this is a decimation. Beyond that, Israel coordinated very quickly, right on the heels of that, striking over 1,500 targets and going all the way up into the Bekaa Valley, everywhere where they've been mapping Hezbollah infrastructure for many, many years, and simultaneous operations on an extraordinary scale with, again, extraordinary success. And, of course, culminating a lot of that with taking out Hassan Nasrallah and also a senior IRGC Iranian official.
Can you say that, though, given the enormous loss of life, it was worth it to take out Hezbollah?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Look, you shed no tears for Hassan Nasrallah. Those around knew where they were located. Again, this is tragic, but it is war. And when you look at what Hassan Nasrallah has done over several decades, including the Marine barracks bombing and many, many others.
But this is Israel's war, not America's, right?
Well, America's lost lives to Hassan Nasrallah's operation just alongside Israel, not in the remotely the same numbers. And of course, keep in mind, again, Hezbollah brought this on themselves. It's their daily volleys of rockets and even anti-tank guided.
But Hezbollah is not the Lebanese people. And now they're dying in large numbers. They're not Hezbollah.
Well, again, the people in the area of Hezbollah, again, this is tragic, it's unfortunate, and they can lay this at the feet of Hezbollah's leadership, who positioned their facilities underneath civilian infrastructure and so forth. And in this case, I think Israel is justified to be doing what they're doing. I'm sure they mapped this out, I'm sure they did the weaponeering, but they had this chance to take out the kingpin, and they took it. And I think that was right, and frankly, I think it was proper, given what Hezbollah has done. Again, Israel didn't start this war with Hezbollah this time. Hezbollah did this out of sympathy with Hamas. They have denied 65,000 Israelis the opportunity to live in peace in their homes. They're displaced. And Hezbollah very much had this coming. Now, the question is, what happens going forward? And I think that what you'll see are a series of raids by Israel into the area between their northern border and the Litani River to dramatically degrade.
You don't see this as a ground invasion of Lebanon?
I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think that they want to get into an occupation, again, even as limited as to the Litani would be. Even that's still 20 miles or so. depending on where you are along that border. And it's a considerable territory. So I think that's roughly what they're doing. So this is a strategy of dramatically degrading Hezbollah's capabilities, not destroying them. And unfortunately, I've been asked by others, will this change the dynamics in Lebanon? Could this finally get rid of this this cancerous element in their society? And I'm afraid that's probably not the case. Keep in mind that Hezbollah is not just the most powerful, or was the most powerful non-state military militia actor. They're also a social service organization.
Provider.
They provide a variety of different social services, schools, clinics, governance, and the rest of that, really beyond the remit.
But knowing all of that, was it worth the loss of life to the Lebanese people? And I'm talking about civilians, women and children.
Look, no one ever wants to see innocent loss of life, but in war that is sometimes necessary. And in this case, again, this is not laid on Israel. This is laid at the feet of Hassan Nasrallah and the leadership of Hezbollah, who did what they did, knowing what the result might be. This is not at all, and I don't see this as a...
The president came out and said, we're calling for a ceasefire, and now Politico releases a report essentially saying that Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein okayed an invasion of Lebanon.
You'll have to ask them about that.
But is this something in your mind that squares with America's policies? The president saying one thing and his people doing another.
Yeah, you refer that to the administration. I'll let them speak for themselves.
Tell me this. You say that Hezbollah will still remain despite this for the Gulf Arab countries.
Much diminished. And it'll take quite some time to rebuild it. Again, they have suffered huge losses, serious degradation, or leadership largely decimated. There are a handful left, we know probably, who will step up and they'll reestablish themselves. But I think what Israel needs to do now is even more aggressive action to keep Iran from being able to bring weapon systems, munitions, and all the rest of that into Lebanon, even, again, more than they have in the past, through the Bekaa, through Syria, and so forth. And they should be very aggressive in doing that. They can't allow this kind of threat to
What
be
about the
reestablished.
Saudis and the UAE? How does this all pan out for them?
I'm sure they shed absolutely no tears for Hassan Nasrallah. They are rightly very concerned about the lot and life of civilians, and especially of the Palestinians in Gaza. And I've been suggesting publicly for since the beginning, that there needs to be a vision not just for the degradation of Hamas, but for the security of Gaza, in which Hamas will no longer have a role. But unless you actually secure that area and provide organized humanitarian assistance, begin reconstruction, begin the establishment of alternative governing mechanisms and provision of security by trained and equipped Palestinian security forces, if you don't do that, what you have is a continuation of a situation that is a humanitarian disaster and a vacuum. But actually that vacuum is being filled. And it's being filled by remnants of Hamas who will not be able to get the arms and ammunition and weapon systems through the tunnels underneath the southern border, because Israel is and should continue to control this. They should not give that up, in my view, despite what some are saying to get a ceasefire. I think they need to retain control of that. Nonetheless, Hamas will reconstitute individually in terms of soldiers unless there is security established and there's no longer a place for them in Gaza. And that would require, I think, incremental occupation by Israeli defense forces to provide security, and then rapidly thinning out and moving on to another area. Start in the north, come a mile in, east-west wall, a couple north-south walls. You have gated communities, just as we established in Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, and Baquba, and so forth. Biometric ID cards for everyone in there. Start humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, then getting a better life for the people, and then introducing Palestinian security forces that could likely be trained by the U.S. At the Jordan International Police Training Center and equipped and overseen. Then you can get humanitarian organizations in an organized way rather than this sort of haphazard way with gangsters taking over the trucks the minute they get inside the border. And you can ensure that Hamas does not have any governance authority in that in that territory, which is critical.
What do you look at? What do you see when you look at Iraq today? Disaster?
I see a country that Iran is trying to Lebanonize, but one that is not welcoming Lebanization, but has elements within it that are furthering that particular cause. So let me explain. It's a country that has had successive democratic elections and transition of power from one party to another without much violence. Yes, one of those took about 9 months of wrangling to get to it, but that is ongoing. It's a country in which you see significant Iranian influence, but it's also one in which you see significant resistance to that influence, and not just by the Sunni and Kurds, but by actual major Shia elements as well, who do not want to become the 51st state of Iran, do not want to see their country turned into Lebanon by the Iranian-supported political figures and militias having undue influence in the parliament and then also on the streets. But they're a force to be reckoned with. They're a big concern. They're pushing the government to reduce our presence over time and so forth. So again, there are some features that are really quite encouraging. The reconstruction, the economy is booming. Yeah, there's corruption. Yes, there's bureaucracy. Yes, there's, again, undue influence of militias. But again, if you look at that country nowadays, it bears no resemblance to the Iraq that we knew and came to love during the surge in Iraq and so forth, with all the damage and destruction. You know, the road from the airport is now no longer the most dangerous road in the world. It's one of the most attractive in the world. There's malls going up. There's hotels. There's all of this. So again, it's complex. It's complicated. And alongside the signs of progress are signs of concern, or that should be concerning. But that's the reality of Iraq. And again, Iraq's neighbors should do everything they can to help Iraq choose its own course and not be unduly influenced or leaned on by Iran and Iran's agents on the ground in Iraq.
Final question. How concerned are you by the Arab Street? And I mean this in the sense that whether they support Hamas or not, or support Hezbollah or not, there is a great deal of anger at what Israel is doing in Gaza and what they're doing right now in Lebanon. Is it worrying to you that the Americans, by supporting Israel, have lost the Arab Street?
First of all, I don't think the Americans have lost the Arab Street. I've been out in the Gulf states twice just in the last, I don't know,
that's not
4
the
or
street.
6 months. Let me finish. Again, and there is legitimate concern about the Palestinians. There has been legitimate concern. I share concern about the Palestinians, especially in Gaza right now, given the damage and destruction that has taken place there and the fragile humanitarian existence that many of them experience. And just imagine the hygiene issues in a country where so much has been destroyed with no electricity, reliably, water, sewers, and all the rest of that. So again, they had to bring back smallpox vaccinations because that broke out again for the first time in just about anywhere at real scale. So look, I share the concern about that, and I think it's legitimate for them to be concerned, and I'd like to see a vision. I'd like to see a vision for a better future for the Palestinians in Gaza, and while we're at it, in the West Bank. Now, Palestinians bear some responsibility here too. They turned down Ehud Olmert's and Ehud Barak's in the Camp David offers many times, and they are in a much worse situation as a result of that. And I understand their fragility and also the political dynamics surrounding Benjamin Netanyahu and so forth. But again, I think the Arab Street should be concerned about it. I think it's a reasonable concern, and there should be actual. Not just a response to the street, there ought to be a response to doing the right thing, to again provide the vision for Gaza in the future that is lacking so far. Even the Minister of Defense has publicly called for this vision, and it has not been forthcoming but from the Israeli Prime Minister. It needs to. And again, if they can't figure out how to do it, just start in the north, go to the south, gated communities all the way down, learn while doing. You don't need a counterinsurgency field manual for that. You can figure it out trial by error.
Anger at us. When does this blow back on us? Because we're seen as supporting it.
I don't see it right now. I mean, again, look, the U.S. has always been according to the Arab Street, the source of every problem in the region, and also, ironically, the solution to every problem. I spent so many years of my life out there. I have gone through this. I've experienced it. We'll see if this transpires into something. I don't see a great resurgence of Islamist extremism in the region, in part because, of course, we enabled local partners to eliminate the Islamic State extremist caliphate, both in Iraq and in northeastern Syria. And as long as we continue to support those partners, I don't think you'll see the capability come back that could extend operations into Europe, much less into the United States. Need to do more about the Islamic State Khorasan group centered on Afghanistan, which obviously carried out the operation in Moscow that did illustrate the capacity to carry out operations far from their base. That's a concern. But I don't see that particular threat the way as anywhere near as bad as it has been even in relatively recent years. I'm worried about it in Africa, but again, that's a much more relevant issue in those countries than it is actually, again, having an ability to carry out international attacks.
David, it's great to have you. Thank you for
to be
joining
with
me.
you.
Cairo, one of the world's greatest megacities, Cairo. It is rich in its historic finery, while at the same time known for its extremely hot weather, traffic, and yes, noise and air pollution. While it is perhaps the city that tourists both love and hate, the experience makes it rather worth the challenges. It's got history that spans centuries, the city is full of vigor, and Cairo is the place to be when you're looking to experience the Egyptian street life. It is, in fact, where the only surviving wonder of the ancient world is. No words can describe the majestic view of the 3 5,000-year-old pyramids on the Giza Plateau. One of the most popular ones is the King's Chamber, considered one of the deepest man-made silences on Earth. Of course, you can't miss the Sphinx. It is both an enormous sight and an overwhelming experience you will never forget. It serves as a guard of the pyramids with its lion body and pharaoh face. It is certainly an iconic monument of the ancient world. You can take hours-long camel rides to get through the pyramids. Despite the heat, dust, and other hurdles while traveling, it is definitely worth it. The pyramids of Cheops, also called the Great Pyramid or the Pyramid of Khufu, is the largest pyramid of the Giza group. You can explore the mysterious interiors of its narrow passages. There's also the Solar Boat Museum behind it, where you will see the ceremonial solar barks that's amazingly been restored to its original glory. On the south, there's a Pyramid of Khafre, which is also known as the Pyramid of Khafre. It also has an internal tunnel that invites you to explore it. Finally, there's the smaller Pyramid of Mycerinus, or the Pyramid of Menkaure. When it comes to shopping, you must visit Khan el-Khalili, which is considered to have one of the world's greatest shopping experiences. Its narrow alleyways have been established since 1400 AD, and up to now is still up and about with all sorts of trade, from tiny stores to cluttered workshops. For sports and recreation, find tennis courts around the south of Jazeera or ride the stables at the sports club. The Cairo Tower, built in 1961 by President Nasser, offers you an amazing view of the sunset at its observation deck.